Beneath layers of dust, earth and time, some places guard secrets never meant to be uncovered. Across deserts, jungles and ancient cities, archaeologists have unearthed artifacts and structures whose precision, symbolism or sheer scale defy explanation, hinting at knowledge lost or deliberately concealed. Ahead lie shadowed tombs, sun-baked ruins and hidden chambers where whispers of the past cling to walls and floors. Each expedition reveals glimpses of civilizations that challenge what we know about history, belief, and human ingenuity, from painted caves and monumental statues to encoded scripts and buried cities. As these discoveries unfold, a single question lingers: what truths were left unspoken, and why were they never meant for us to see? Heinrich Schliemann, the Treasure of Troy. A pale haze often settles over the hill of Hisarlik at daybreak, softening the ragged outlines of stone and earth until they resemble the half-remembered images of an ancient city drifting between memory and myth. The ground carries the weight of repeated habitation, its layers rising and sinking through the demands of time, each one preserving fragments of a world that vanished long before written history tried to describe it. It was within this muted landscape that Heinrich Schliemann pursued his conviction that the stories preserved in Homer's epics were rooted in real place, hidden beneath centuries of shifting soil. What emerged from his trench walls was not the simple footprint of a heroic city, but a tangled accumulation of civilizations built one atop another, each separated by destruction, abandonment, or renewal. Schliemann soon realized that the mound did not hold a single Troy but many Troys, stacked in a vertical sequence that challenged every assumption about the region's early history. The lower levels revealed burnt clay, charred beams, and collapsed stones that indicated catastrophic events, though their causes remained elusive. These fragments, while datable, introduced more uncertainty than resolution. As deeper strata were exposed, the configuration of fortification walls began to contradict established chronologies, suggesting that the earliest inhabitants of Hisarlik possessed a sophistication that earlier historians had overlooked. The ash-blackened debris fields, mixed with imported pottery styles, implied interactions with distant groups whose presence could not be fully traced. These inconsistencies forced archaeologists to consider whether the city had risen and fallen in cycles far more complicated than previously imagined. Schliemann's eagerness to press downward revealed a timeline that unfolded in unexpected directions. A series of narrow passageways came to light as workers removed rubble from an ancient collapse, revealing corridors shaped by deliberate architectural intention. Their angles manipulated sunlight and shadow in ways that suggested both defensive logic and ritual sensitivity, directing movement through tight spaces that seemed designed to heighten awareness. These passageways connected to chambers whose proportions felt measured with surprising precision, even in ruin. Schliemann recognized that the builders of early Troy had engineered spaces with purposes far beyond the utilitarian needs of everyday life. It was in one such secluded alcove, sealed beneath dense layers of ash and stone, that Schliemann's team noticed a muted glimmer within the dust. Below the debris lay a collection of precious metal objects, diadems, bracelets, vessels and chains that would later be grouped under the name Priam's treasure. Though their true origin predated the era attributed to the legendary king, the hoard's placement within a destruction layer hinted at a hurried concealment during an emergency, though the identity of the people who hid it remains unknown. Over time, the manner in which the treasure left Hisarlik became almost as debated as the hoard itself, for Schliemann secretly transported many of the artifacts out of Ottoman territory and only later disclosed their existence to authorities. His decision reflected the loose regulations of early archaeology, yet it generated tensions that echoed through decades of scholarly exchange. The controversy surrounding the treasure's removal led to diplomatic negotiations, shifting museum claims, and a long trail of legal disputes that shaped how archaeological ethics would evolve. These conflicts revealed how profoundly Schliemann's discovery challenged the institutions responsible for protecting ancient heritage. The craftsmanship of the treasure posed an immediate puzzle for scholars who later examined the recovered items. Gold sheets had been hammered into delicate patterns, and fine chains displayed a level of metallurgical accuracy that required advanced skill. Some of the forms resembled styles known from distant regions, suggesting that Hisarlik possessed trade connections beyond its immediate surroundings. These objects demonstrated an artistic maturity that challenged earlier assumptions, about the technological capabilities of early Bronze Age Anatolia, raising questions about the culture responsible for such refinement. Even more perplexing were the massive stone fortifications uncovered near the levels associated with the treasure. Stones shaped with an understanding of weight distribution that exceeded expectations for their estimated age. The sheer scale of these walls implied that the city's early inhabitants possessed architectural knowledge inconsistent with the fragmented historical record. Later archaeologists who revisited the site confirmed that the construction techniques demonstrated planning and expertise previously uncredited to the region's earliest builders, further complicating interpretations of Troy's origins. Additional discoveries beneath the rubble revealed ritual features that resisted clear explanation, including ash-filled pits, carefully arranged stones, and patterned placements of animal bones. These configurations suggested ceremonial behaviours whose meanings had been lost through centuries of cultural displacement. Without written records from the deeper levels, researchers were forced to rely on spatial interpretation, yet the recurring motifs hinted at symbolic practices that left faint but persistent marks in the soil. These findings suggested that early Troy was shaped by beliefs and customs no longer preserved in surviving traditions. Evidence from soil chemistry studies conducted in later decades added yet another layer of intrigue to the deeper levels of Hisarlik, revealing traces of unusual mineral concentrations and abrupt shifts in sediment composition. These patterns suggested that ancient builders repeatedly modified the landscape, perhaps redirecting natural water flow or reshaping terraces to support ritual or defensive structures. The irregular layering, marked by sudden deposits inconsistent with typical settlement waste, implied episodes of environmental disturbance that archaeologists still struggle to explain. Such findings reinforced the impression that Troy's earliest inhabitants manipulated their surroundings in ways not yet understood. Layers associated with long-distance exchange became increasingly evident as excavations progressed. Mineral analysis of tools and ornaments revealed origins far beyond the Troad region, implying that Troy occupied a strategic position along early trade routes that connected the Aegean, Anatolia, and possibly even more remote territories. Imported ceramics, metallurgical traces, and stylistic influences indicated a society far more interconnected than earlier theories allowed. Yet the mechanisms behind these exchanges remained obscured by incomplete evidence, leaving unanswered how such distant connections were managed. One of the most disquieting revelations emerged when researchers noticed that certain early structures aligned with astronomical markers, including solstitial sunrise points and significant lunar cycles. These alignments appeared intentional rather than coincidental, suggesting that the city's planners incorporated celestial observations into the organization of space. While interpretations varied, the precision of these orientations implied a level of cosmological understanding not typically attributed to the earliest inhabitants of Hisarlik. Their exact purpose remains uncertain, suspended between practical observation and symbolic meaning. As archaeological methods advanced over the decades following Schliemann's initial work, new analyses refined the chronology of Troy's many layers yet failed to simplify its story. Instead, each refinement revealed additional complexity, emphasizing that the mound held evidence of a city that had been rebuilt in response to unknown pressures, shifting alliances, natural disasters, or cultural transformations. Schliemann's determination to unearth a single legendary city inadvertently unveiled an older, more intricate narrative, one woven through centuries of change and loss. Even now, beneath the weathered paths and excavation trenches, there remain sealed spaces no tool has reached, where the earliest voices of Troy wait in complete darkness, untouched and unexplained. Howard Carter Tutankhamun's tomb. Across the sun-bleached ravines of the Valley of the Kings, a quiet heaviness lingered in the air as if the cliffs themselves guarded something long withheld. The desert's heat pressed into the narrow wadis, carrying the scent of limestone dust that had settled untouched for centuries. Workers moved slowly across the terrain, scattering small stones as they cleared ground that had been excavated and abandoned many times before. Only a few hints suggested the potential of anything hidden beneath this surface, yet Carter followed them with unwavering patience, sensing that the ancient landscape still concealed a secret not yet claimed. In the vast silence of the necropolis, small fragments of pottery and faded traces of workmen's huts slowly convinced Howard Carter that a hidden chamber still waited beyond the reach of earlier expeditions. These fragments seemed insignificant to some, but to Carter they formed a subtle trail pointing towards an undiscovered structure. Years of methodical study in the valley had taught him that minor clues often connected to larger truths, especially in an area shaped by countless burials and construction episodes. Funding was dwindling, pressure was growing, and yet he persisted, convinced the evidence quietly aligned in his favour. Down in the loose gravel where the workmen dug, the first outline of a staircase emerged with a stillness that suggested no footsteps had touched it since antiquity. When the top step revealed itself, coated with dust compacted through millennia, the team felt the atmosphere shift, as though the earth itself recognised an intrusion. Carter ordered the workers to clear the rest of the staircase with extreme care, aware that any misstep could damage whatever lay below. With each stone removed, the steps descended deeper into darkness, inviting speculation about what might wait at the base of that ancient passage. Pressed into the plaster of the sealed doorway, Royal Necropolis insignias stared back with a clarity so intact it seemed to defy the passing of 3,000 years. The Jackal and 9 Captives motif, unmistakable in its symbolism, confirmed the doorway belonged to an official tomb left undisturbed since its sealing. Carter examined the impressions closely, noting their sharpness and their authority, aware that intact seals represented a rarity in a valley long targeted by ancient thieves. The implications were extraordinary, suggesting not only a burial of significance, but a chamber protected through time by circumstance and by the very landscape that had hidden it. Through the narrow breach cut into the upper corner of the entrance, a pale shimmer rose from inside the chamber as Carter's candlelight reflected off unfamiliar shapes. The small hole allowed only a fleeting view, yet what Carter glimpsed defied expectation. Golden surfaces flickered in the smoky glow, emerging from the darkness like dormant constellations trapped beneath stone. Objects lay piled yet undisturbed, as though placed with intention and left untouched by any living hand since the ritual closing of the tomb. The sight stirred a quiet awe, confirming that beyond the sealed door awaited a space frozen at the moment of its creation. Among the jumbled yet curiously intentional positions of chariots, caskets, and gilded furnishings, a subtle order hinted at a symbolism modern observers could not easily decode. Even fragments that appeared displaced seemed to follow patterns reminiscent of ritual staging, tools set beside ceremonial objects as though arranged for a journey rather than simply stored. The towering chariots leaned against the walls with an odd deliberateness, and the scattered boxes radiated outward from central points as if marking some cosmological diagram. Carter recognized the complexity, yet hesitated to interpret it fully, knowing persistent gaps in Egyptological understanding often obscured deeper ritual meaning. Standing motionless at the threshold to the burial chamber, the ebony-coated guardian statues appeared to watch the intruders with an attention that felt strangely deliberate. Their slender forms, adorned with gold details that caught the flicker of lantern light, conveyed a presence that felt more than symbolic. The statues' polished surfaces seemed to absorb the room's silence, creating an impression of timeless vigilance. Carter studied their posture, noting the rigid staffs and the calm yet imposing expressions. These guardians framed the sealed doorway so precisely that their placement suggested a profound significance known only to those who had once crafted them. Inside the crowded enclosure beyond the guardians, the towering nested shrines formed a layered barrier that seemed engineered to keep something contained rather than merely protected. Each gilded shrine fitted perfectly around the next, creating a sequence of enclosures reminiscent of architectural puzzles. The precision of their alignment impressed even seasoned craftsmen who later examined them, for such construction required planning of the highest order. Carter observed how the very scale of the shrines suggested a desire to envelop the central sarcophagus in a fortress of symbolic meaning. Their arrangement evoked a deliberate sense of seclusion surrounding the king within. Within those gleaming barriers, the inner coffins and golden mask rested in a serenity so absolute that the young king's image appeared to gaze past the living entirely. The mask's iconic features, framed by the gold and lapis headdress, reflected the craftsmanship of artisans who had shaped each detail with remarkable skill. Scholars recognized the symbols inscribed across the coffins as protective invocations, yet their full meaning had never been completely resolved. Carter examined the delicate inlays and fine contours, struck by how the burial assemblage communicated both regal authority and a sense of distance, as though addressing realms inaccessible to modern interpretation. Scattered among the more recognisable treasures lay small containers, ritual objects and enigmatic tools, whose purposes remained only partially understood even after decades of study. Some vessels held residues of unidentifiable mixtures, and certain items resembled implements preserved nowhere else in the archaeological record. Papyrus fragments lay fragile and darkened by age, their incomplete inscriptions hinting at ceremonies whose origins scholars could only approximate. Carter catalogued each piece with precision, aware that these subtle remnants often carried insights more revealing than the monumental objects. Yet many pieces resisted explanation, maintaining their mysteries across generations of research and interpretation. Sealed by floods, sand, and the tomb's own collapsing debris, the chamber endured centuries with an integrity few other burial sites ever achieved. Geological deposits suggested that periodic shifts in the valley protected the tomb rather than exposing it, creating conditions that thwarted ancient intruders. The natural ceiling preserved delicate items that would have otherwise decayed, enabling Carter to encounter materials rarely found intact. Scholars later noted that the tomb's survival owed as much to environmental accidents as to its original architectural design. This accidental preservation only deepened the sense of improbability surrounding the tomb's rediscovery in the modern era. In the weeks that followed the initial entry, scholars, officials and workers moved through the rooms with a reverence that deepened as unfamiliar symbols and silent arrangements revealed themselves. Each object required careful study, yet the overwhelming abundance of items challenged the team's capacity to understand their relationships. Despite meticulous documentation, many artifacts remained enigmatic, suggesting layers of cultural meaning now lost. Carter recognized that, even with the most disciplined approach, the tomb held more questions than answers. Its completeness, its arrangement, and its unusually intact state combined to create an enduring enigma far surpassing expectations. Somewhere in the depths of that sealed chamber, a fragment of meaning still seems to rest just beyond what the living are permitted to know. Hiram Bingham, Machu Picchu. Hiram Bingham pressed through the undergrowth, aware that every step upward drew him closer to a secret the mountains had preserved for centuries. The early morning air was thin, cool, and heavy with mist, each breath reminding him of the elevation he'd climbed to reach this hidden ridge. Native guides moved cautiously ahead, indicating subtle breaks in the vegetation that hinted at something unnatural among the green folds. The expedition had already faced weeks of uncertainty, and yet the sense of anticipation built steadily with every step, as if the mountains themselves were conspiring to reward those patient enough to seek their concealed history. Whispers from local villagers guided his attention to faint traces of stonework, almost invisible beneath the dense growth of the ridges. The Quechua farmers spoke of ruins obscured by foliage and mist, their stories blending observation with legend. Bingham recorded their directions carefully, cross-referencing them with his notes and the scattered maps that hinted at forgotten paths. Each fragment of guidance seemed inconclusive alone, yet combined they suggested a pattern, a city lost above the valley floor. The villagers' knowledge felt simultaneously precise and incomplete, offering enough to lead an explorer onward while leaving the true scope of the site deliberately hidden from immediate view. Maps and sketches failed to capture the subtle curves of the hidden terraces, leaving the explorer to rely on intuition and patience. Paths once used by workers and animals had been reclaimed by nature, leaving only tentative impressions in damp earth and tangled roots. Bingham advanced slowly, noting every indentation, every irregularity in the stone that might suggest human construction. The altitude and thick vegetation obscured angles and lines that would have been obvious from above, creating a sense of disorientation that heightened the impression of the ruins' deliberate secrecy. Every discovery required careful measurement, photography, and repeated observation to avoid misinterpretation. Candlelight and morning mist mingled as the first glimpses of carved walls emerged from the tangled vegetation. Terraces rose like steps toward a clouded sky, each wall cut with the precision of master stonemasonry. Sunlight reflected in small gaps between stones, revealing edges that seemed impossibly straight. almost untouched by centuries of rain and erosion. Bingham's team paused frequently, unsure whether they were witnessing fortifications, dwellings, or ceremonial spaces. Each segment of wall hinted at design logic far beyond practical necessity, suggesting that whoever built this city had intended it to endure yet remain concealed, a puzzle for those who might one day discover it. Hands brushing away moss revealed edges so precise that Bingham could scarcely believe they were carved by human hands alone. The stones fitted together without mortar, interlocking with the kind of accuracy that left gaps too small for a knife to penetrate. Every wall and terrace reflected an understanding of both the landscape and structural stress that would withstand centuries of seismic activity. Observing the meticulous workmanship, Bingham felt a mixture of admiration and unease, recognizing that the city's creators had solved engineering challenges that would puzzle modern builders. The sophistication suggested knowledge carefully preserved and transmitted, yet the reason for such laborious construction remained enigmatic. Every terrace and stair seemed calculated, as if the builders had anticipated centuries of concealment and natural erosion. Channels for water ran along narrow stone gutters, and the slopes appeared designed to resist landslides while nourishing crops. The careful placement of staircases and ramps indicated an understanding of both human movement and ceremonial procession. Even the orientation of certain terraces suggested consideration of solar patterns and seasonal light. Bingham noted how each feature seemed to serve multiple purposes: functional, aesthetic, and perhaps symbolic, leaving observers to wonder whether the site's planning concealed messages meant for future generations. Notes in Bingham's journal described the uncertainty that followed each discovery, where the purpose of the structures remained just beyond comprehension. Scholars who later examined his writings found meticulous descriptions but few definitive conclusions. Rooms that could have been dwellings were too carefully constructed to ignore ceremonial implications, and open plazas hinted at gatherings unseen and unrecorded. Even the most familiar structures resisted simple categorization, with overlapping terraces and irregular layouts confounding straightforward interpretation. Bingham recorded each anomaly faithfully, aware that the ruins offered glimpses of lives and practices no longer documented in the surviving Inca chronicles. Fragments of pottery, tools, and ritual objects appeared in shallow depressions, hinting at lives lived in deliberate isolation. Some vessels displayed intricate geometric designs. Others were plain but expertly fired, reflecting both utility and artistic intention. Tools for weaving, metalworking, and agriculture revealed practical, daily routines alongside ceremonial implements, whose function remains debated. Human and animal remains suggested selective burial and ceremonial deposition, rather than simple occupation. Each object raised questions about the hierarchy, social practices, and spiritual life of Machu Picchu's inhabitants, leaving gaps that invited speculation while grounding the story firmly in tangible evidence. Within the broader timeline of Inca history, Machu Picchu occupies a place that feels almost detached, as though its creators intended it to resist easy classification. No contemporary records confirm its foundation, and the absence of documents describing its purpose reinforces the impression of deliberate secrecy. Archaeologists have debated whether it served as a royal estate, a religious retreat, or a defensive post, yet all conclusions remain provisional. Bingham himself recognized the tension between empirical observation and the unknown intentions of the builders. Each measured terrace and each stone corner seemed to straddle functional utility and symbolic meaning, leaving a residue of questions that lingered long after initial surveys. Paths winding between cliffs and terraces seemed almost engineered to mislead outsiders, keeping the city's heart carefully hidden. Certain approaches revealed only partial glimpses, while others presented dead ends or steep ascents designed to obscure sightlines. Watercourses and vegetation further concealed the larger plan, creating a labyrinth of impressions that could misdirect the uninitiated. Bingham and his guys had to navigate these carefully, aware that even minor errors might compromise their understanding of the site's spatial logic. The effect was a constant tension between revelation and concealment, making each terrace discovered feel like a partial triumph over centuries of intentional or natural concealment. As Bingham's team documented the ruins, uncertainty settled over their observations, for each alignment and pattern suggested more questions than answers. Surveying walls, plazas, and terraces, they could discern sophistication in urban planning and construction, yet could not confidently interpret why certain choices were made. Some walls aligned with astronomical markers, others appeared arbitrary until considered in a broader network of terraces. The more they uncovered, the more intricate and deliberate the city seemed. Every discovery prompted further inquiry, reinforcing a sense that the site had been designed to communicate knowledge selectively, leaving outsiders only partial insight into its true function. Time and exposure slowly altered some details, yet the major structures endured with an uncanny resilience, hinting at knowledge now lost to memory. Rain, erosion and vegetation continued to shape the landscape, yet the terraces, walls and shrines remained intact in ways that defied casual expectation. Scholars later noted that the combination of precise construction techniques and geographic concealment ensured that Machu Picchu could survive centuries of neglect without collapse. Bingham observed this resilience firsthand, aware that the city's endurance created both an archaeological opportunity and a puzzle. How could such precision, purpose and preservation coexist in a site so remote and hidden? And in the quiet of that mountain citadel, one senses that the city revealed only fragments of a story even Bingham could not fully comprehend. Giovanni Belzoni, Tomb of Seti Wurst. A heavy silence filled the corridor, broken only by the scrape of tools against stone as shadows shifted across the painted walls. By the third step, Giovanni Belzoni realized that the Tomb of Seti has concealed far more than simple burial chambers, demanding both ingenuity and physical endurance to navigate. The sheer scale of the entrance suggested centuries of untouched complexity, and the atmosphere pressed in on him, thick with dust, anticipation, and the unspoken promise of secrets held for millennia. He moved cautiously, aware that each stone might conceal either treasure or obstruction, and that centuries of sand and decay could conceal dangers unseen. He tested the weight of the massive blocks, aware that each step forward required ingenuity, strength, and an understanding of the builder's formidable engineering. The doorway, estimated to weigh several tons, resisted every attempt to shift it, forcing Belzoni to combine levers, ropes, and sheer determination. His prior experience in Egypt had honed both his body and mind to confront obstacles of extraordinary scale, yet the tomb demanded more than physical skill. It required an intuitive grasp of engineering logic that seemed centuries ahead of its time. Every movement had to be precise, measured, and deliberate, for one miscalculation could collapse a passage or damage priceless relics. Corridors twisted and sloped unexpectedly, forming a labyrinth that seemed designed to mislead intruders while preserving the pharaoh's secrets. Some passages descended at steep angles into darkness, while others branched off at sharp turns, revealing hidden recesses before disappearing from view. Belzoni noted the intentional irregularity, suspecting that the tomb's architects had sought both to protect the burial and to instill a sense of awe and confusion. Each turn offered glimpses of painted reliefs and stonework, yet threatened to disorient even the most careful observer. The labyrinthine layout suggested that the tomb was not merely a resting place, but a carefully constructed puzzle designed to safeguard knowledge and ritual practice. The walls erupted in brilliant reliefs, their carved figures and painted hieroglyphs telling stories that modern scholars still struggle to fully interpret. Scenes of gods, rituals, and pharaohs were rendered with extraordinary detail and precision. Colours, though faded, remained vibrant, and inscriptions recorded ceremonial practices, religious hierarchies, and offerings meant to accompany Seti I into the afterlife. Belzoni examined the reliefs closely, noting both the craftsmanship and the symbolism embedded in every line. Some depictions appeared esoteric, hinting at knowledge or rites deliberately concealed from casual observers. The tomb seemed to speak a language only partially accessible, one that revealed glimpses of an ancient worldview deliberately preserved through stone. Stone ceilings arched overhead with careful precision, while hidden grooves and channels suggested mechanisms meant to protect the tomb from unwelcome hands. Corbelled ceilings formed tunnels capable of bearing immense weight, while concealed doorways and channels hinted at early methods of tomb security. Belzoni marvelled at the foresight of the builders, who had combined practical engineering with ritualistic design to create spaces both monumental and impervious. Each architectural element reinforced the impression that the tomb was not simply a repository of remains, but a carefully orchestrated environment, designed to endure centuries and resist intrusion. The blend of utility and artistry created an atmosphere simultaneously inspiring and unsettling. In the shadowed side chambers, smaller artifacts and cryptic inscriptions lay in near-complete isolation, as if intentionally removed from the main flow of the tomb. Figurines, ceremonial objects, and inscriptions carved into niches and corners suggested rituals beyond ordinary funerary practice. Some items were functional, while others appeared purely symbolic, intended for purposes now obscured by time. Belzoni took careful notes, photographing each item and sketching layouts. The presence of isolated chambers implied that the tomb's creators had deliberately segregated knowledge, leaving certain spaces almost inaccessible. The effect was to create layers of discovery, some immediate and some frustratingly withheld, enhancing the tomb's aura of hidden wisdom. Belzoni employed levers, ropes, and scaffolding with meticulous timing, moving obstacles that would have crushed lesser men and damaged priceless relics. Heavy stones had to be lifted, staircases traversed at precarious angles, and doorways manipulated without disturbing delicate surfaces. His experience as a circus strongman and engineer proved indispensable, yet the work remained exhausting and dangerous. Each maneuver revealed more of the tomb's secrets, while highlighting the ingenuity of its builders. The tomb appeared to challenge the explorer at every turn, rewarding skill and patience with glimpses of its carefully preserved contents, while leaving other areas tantalizingly concealed. At the heart of the tomb, the sarcophagus of Seti rested in solemn grandeur, surrounded by ceremonial objects that combined ritual, artistry, and deliberate enigma. The sarcophagus itself, carved from alabaster, bore intricate inscriptions invoking divine protection and guidance for the pharaoh's journey beyond life. Surrounding objects, vessels, amulets, and symbolic items were arranged with meticulous care, each seemingly intended to play a role in the afterlife. Belzoni documented their placement and condition, recognizing that the arrangement was meaningful in ways he could only partially interpret. The tomb seemed alive with intentionality, as if each object, wall, and passage were components of a sacred narrative, still resisting full understanding. Empty niches and partially damaged reliefs hinted at knowledge intentionally hidden or irretrievably lost, leaving the tomb perpetually incomplete to the eyes of the living. Some chambers bore eroded inscriptions, while others had walls stripped of original pigments. Belzoni speculated on whether these absences resulted from time, looting, or deliberate design. The gaps created ambiguity, forcing him to reconstruct narratives from fragmentary evidence. Each missing piece heightened the sense of mystery, suggesting that the tomb's creators had purposefully encoded knowledge, allowing only partial comprehension for those who entered. Even with meticulous observation, the tomb retained its secrets, resisting definitive interpretation. In private notes, Belzoni confessed both exhilaration and apprehension, realizing that the tomb's design might forever prevent a full understanding of its creator's intentions. He recorded the thrill of discovery alongside frustration at the limitations of human perception. The tomb's layout, reliefs, and artifacts seemed to convey knowledge that transcended immediate comprehension, as if deliberately veiled. Even after careful study, Belzoni acknowledged that the deeper meaning of the tomb might remain elusive, available only to those who could perceive intentions embedded in both architecture and symbolism. The interplay of human ingenuity and mystery left him both proud of his accomplishment and humbled by what remained beyond reach. Centuries of sand, decay, and prior intrusion had altered some features, yet the core structures and carefully placed objects endured with remarkable resilience. The tomb had survived looting, environmental damage, and the passage of time with its essential integrity intact. Walls, corridors, and artifacts remained largely preserved, demonstrating the foresight and skill of its builders. Belzoni noted that the tomb's enduring stability amplified the sense of deliberate concealment and protection, as if designed to withstand both the elements and the curiosity of future explorers. Preservation and mystery intertwined, creating a layered experience that combined factual observation with enduring enigma. As he prepared to leave the tomb, Belzoni could feel the weight of the centuries pressing against him, an almost tangible reminder that the pharaoh's secrets were only partially revealed. Each step outward was accompanied by a sense of awe and reverence, knowing that the tomb contained knowledge, artistry, and ritual beyond full comprehension. he reflected on the ingenuity, devotion, and intention required to construct such an environment, marvelling at the civilization capable of such precision. The tomb remained both a monument and a puzzle, revealing fragments of its story while retaining its most profound mysteries, defying final understanding. Somewhere in the angles and recesses of Seti's tomb, Belzoni glimpsed secrets that time itself seemed to guard from the living. Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola Altamira Cave. A damp coolness hung in the cave, carrying the faint scent of mineral and earth as shadows traced every uneven surface. By the second step inside, Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola realized he had stumbled upon walls adorned with figures whose complexity far exceeded what anyone had expected from prehistoric hands. The flickering light of his lantern revealed a tapestry of bison, deer, and horses, each painted with deliberate contours and proportions that hinted at an understanding of anatomy that seemed extraordinary for the era. The cave seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for recognition of its hidden artistry. The first painted bison emerged from the darkness, its contours so lifelike that it seemed ready to move at any moment. Muscles rippled beneath painted hides, eyes captured a sense of awareness, and even the positioning of hooves suggested motion. Sautuola knelt closer, careful not to disturb the fragile pigments, and traced the shape with his eyes, absorbing the precision of lines laid down tens of thousands of years earlier. Each figure seemed to convey both life and purpose, leaving him to wonder at the level of skill and observation possessed by its unknown creator. Ochre and charcoal clung stubbornly to the rock, layered in patterns that suggested careful planning and deliberate artistry. Variations in tone and density created depth, shadows accentuating musculature and movement. Sautuola noted that some pigments had blended naturally with the contours of the cave, taking advantage of bumps and hollows to suggest perspective. The craftsmanship suggested not mere representation, but conscious expression, implying symbolic intention or ritualistic meaning far beyond what contemporaneous understanding of Paleolithic humans would assume. Figures overlapped with a sense of movement and perspective, creating scenes that conveyed action and interaction rather than static representation. Bison charged across the walls, sometimes colliding with other animals in ways that captured the tension of their interactions. Horses appeared to rear in flight, and deer leapt with uncanny accuracy. Sautuola realized that the artists had used overlapping and foreshortening techniques that would not become common in European art for tens of thousands of years. The sophistication of composition and visual storytelling left him both awed and unsettled. Sautuola documented the surrounding chamber layers, noting traces of occupation and the depth at which these paintings were discovered. The floor retained evidence of hearths, charred bones and tools, suggesting repeated human activity over extended periods. Each layer told a story not only of artistic creation, but of the lives that surrounded and interacted with it. The positioning of the art above and around living spaces implied deliberate placement, as if the images themselves were meant to participate in the life of the cave, rather than merely decorate it. Scholars initially questioned the authenticity of the cave art, their skepticism amplifying the sense that these images were almost too advanced for their era. Critics doubted that Paleolithic humans could achieve such realism, and some accused Sautuola of forgery. This controversy lingered for years, yet the techniques, pigments, and stratigraphic evidence ultimately confirmed the antiquity of the works. The doubt, however, added to the aura of mystery, reinforcing the idea that these paintings were not merely artistic expression, but traces of knowledge or symbolic practice, not meant for us to fully comprehend at the time. The natural contours of the cave walls seemed to guide the placement of each animal, as if the rock itself was part of the creative process. Bulges, hollows, and indentations were embraced and incorporated into the art, giving depth and dynamism that no flat surface could achieve. Bison backs arched along natural curves, and hooves touched ridges that enhanced realism. Sautuola marvelled at the way the environment and art merged, as though the cave had dictated the motion of the artist's hand, creating an interplay between nature and human intention that modern observers still struggle to interpret. Red handprints and geometric motifs punctuated the murals, suggesting symbolic meaning or a ritual purpose beyond simple decoration. Hands pressed directly onto stone, negative impressions, and abstract lines formed a visual language whose meaning remained elusive. The repetition of certain patterns hinted at tradition or codified knowledge, with some designs appearing across multiple chambers. Sautuola recognized that these markings were likely more than embellishment. They were evidence of thought, intention, and perhaps even communication across generations, intended for an audience that would understand their significance in ways lost to modern observers. Fragile mineral deposits glimmered along the cave floor, a reminder that the painting's survival was as precarious as it was remarkable. Every step and every breath carried the potential to damage centuries-old work, and the pigments themselves were subject to natural decay, humidity, and microbial activity. Sautuola approached the walls with a reverence bordering on fear, knowing that each measurement, sketch, and observation had to be conducted with extreme care. The fragility heightened the sense that the cave contained something rare and profound, a fleeting window into minds long vanished. In his notes, Sautuola marvelled at the technical mastery of the artists, recognizing the depth of understanding required to produce such realism. He recorded the orientation of figures, variations in pigment, and the apparent purpose behind each handprint and line. The accuracy and intentionality suggested that these prehistoric humans possessed not only artistic skill but symbolic and observational intelligence far ahead of conventional historical timelines. He reflected on the centuries separating them from his own era, and the sense of wonder grew as he realized the implications of such cognitive sophistication in early human communities. Generations had returned to these walls, leaving a continuity of symbolic expression that hinted at knowledge passed across millennia. Subsequent artists and observers may have added to, modified, or replicated existing figures, creating a layered history that combined time, ritual, and practice. Sautuola contemplated the possibility that these images were part of an ongoing cultural memory, a deliberate preservation of symbolic knowledge that would outlast individual lives. The cave, in this sense, was a repository not only of art but of human thought, encoded in pigment and stone for unknown audiences to witness. As he finally emerged from the cave, the fading glow of the painted animals lingered in Sautuola's mind, their presence echoing long after the walls themselves were left behind. The damp chill of the cave gave way to daylight, but the sense of having glimpsed intelligence and creativity far removed from his own era remained. The images were at once tangible and otherworldly, a testament to human ingenuity that defied expectations. Each step outward carried with it a heightened awareness of the fragile intersection between art, history, and mystery that the Altamira cave so powerfully embodied. In the flickering shadows of Altamira, the bison and hands seemed to whisper of minds reaching across millennia, hinting at understanding we are only beginning to glimpse. Percy Fawcett, Lost City of Z. A knot of anticipation tightened in Fawcett's chest as he considered the paths ahead, each one leading deeper into a forest few had dared to traverse. By the third sentence, his gaze settled on maps and notes, hinting at a city lost to time, a civilization glimpsed only in fragments and stories. Every possible route seemed simultaneously promising and perilous, and the unknown pressed upon him with a weight that was both exhilarating and frightening. He adjusted his pack, steadying himself against the uncertainty, knowing that every choice would shape what he might, or might never, find. He adjusted the straps of his pack and tested his footing on uneven soil, measuring each step with the cautious patience of a man who knew the stakes. Thick vines and unpredictable terrain slowed his progress, each root and fallen branch a potential hazard. Fawcett scrutinized the undergrowth for broken branches, unusual soil patterns, and faint impressions that might indicate footpaths long abandoned. Even the shape of fallen trees suggested past human clearing or construction. Every subtle cue was logged mentally, a delicate balance between progress and careful observation that transformed the forest into a complex puzzle of past human activity waiting to be interpreted. Whispers of forgotten settlements and half-remembered tales of gold and grandeur had long haunted Fawcett's imagination, compelling him to venture where others feared. Accounts collected from explorers, missionaries, and local legends described a city of immense scale, a civilization vanished without a record, leaving behind only fragments of walls, terraces, and artifacts. Fawcett's own meticulous study of maps and oral histories strengthened the belief that this was not a myth, but evidence of a civilization not meant for us to find so easily. Each story, however fragmentary, fueled his obsession with tracing the lost city's secrets. A slight movement caught his eye, an unusual formation among roots and vines, and he paused to consider whether it could be a remnant of human activity. Terraces and earthen mounds occasionally emerged from the greenery, subtle hints that the jungle had absorbed structures meant to endure. Fawcett knelt to examine one, noting its angles, its alignment with other formations, and the marks that suggested deliberate shaping. Even in partial decay, these elements hinted at a culture whose engineering and planning were far beyond what the surrounding forest might suggest. Conversations with indigenous guides offered fragments of knowledge, cryptic warnings, and hints that the city existed, though hidden behind layers of time and growth. Some spoke of places long abandoned, others of ruins swallowed by dense forest, all conveyed with a caution that suggested respect and fear. Fawcett listened closely, recording every detail, aware that these oral traditions might contain truths lost to written history. Each ambiguous clue added to the aura of mystery surrounding the city and reinforced the sense that it was intentionally concealed, known only to those who had lived in its shadow. Muscles burning and sweat dripping, Fawcett pressed forward, each step testing endurance, resolve, and the unspoken compulsion to see what had never been seen. Days of trekking brought relentless challenges: tropical heat, swamps, leeches, and unpredictable rainfall. Yet every hazard underscored the stakes of his quest. Even as exhaustion threatened, the glimpses of terraces, mounds, and pottery shards kept him moving, each sign suggesting a civilization capable of organization, artistry, and perhaps knowledge lost to modern understanding. The peril itself seemed inseparable from the promise of discovery. Pottery shards and worn tools appeared unexpectedly beneath his hands, evidence that hands long vanished had once shaped this terrain with purpose and skill. Small fragments suggested habitation patterns, and occasional traces of walls hinted at the existence of buildings. Some pottery bore decorative patterns and shapes unfamiliar to contemporary explorers, hinting at artistic traditions and cultural practices now lost. Even eroded tools carried marks of precision, suggesting skills and techniques that had vanished with their creators. Fawcett traced grooves and edges, imagining the hands that had shaped them, piecing together a civilization that had left traces only for those persistent enough to notice. Every bend in the river revealed subtle patterns, remnants of terraces or earthworks that teased the mind with the suggestion of a structured settlement. Observing the flow of water and the orientation of the land, Fawcett began to reconstruct the possible layout of a city adapted to its environment. Terraces aligned with natural water channels hinted at irrigation or flood management. Subtle mounds appeared positioned for visibility across distances, possibly marking boundaries or ceremonial spaces. Each observation reinforced the notion of sophisticated planning, challenging assumptions about pre-Columbian societies in the Amazon and hinting at a civilization deliberately designed to harmonize with the jungle's natural rhythms. The more he documented anomalies in the land, the more he believed in a civilization that had vanished without a trace, leaving only hints to chase. Despite careful mapping, no single feature revealed the city in full, and each discovery led to more questions than answers. Fawcett's notes became a mosaic of observation, theory, and speculation, capturing evidence of terraces, roads, and artifacts, while acknowledging the impossibility of seeing the entire city. The forest seemed almost to resist his efforts, preserving its secrets with deliberate opacity. Hours of isolation weighed heavily, sharpening both focus and unease as the unknown pressed in on all sides, tangible yet imperceptible. Each day the jungle tested his resilience and resolve, demanding vigilance against snakes, insects, and unseen hazards. Yet the very difficulty of the expedition intensified the allure. What was concealed by such challenges must surely be extraordinary. Fawcett's determination deepened, a mixture of obsession and conviction that propelled him forward despite growing uncertainty and ever-present danger. His meticulous sketches, notes, and observations captured fleeting clues, fragments of a civilization glimpsed only in echoes and impressions. Every terrace, mound, and artifact was logged with precision, creating a record for others to follow, yet none could claim to have seen the city in its entirety. Fawcett understood that the true discovery might forever elude him, and the notion that some knowledge was beyond reach became intertwined with the very thrill of exploration. The lost city of Z existed in fragments, a puzzle awaiting resolution across generations. Even as fatigue mounted, the enigma of Z seemed to grow with each step, as though the city itself resisted revelation, cloaked in secrecy and time. The forest held its answers close, revealing only glimpses, impressions, and tantalizing fragments. Fawcett's persistence, courage, and meticulous record-keeping ensured that the mystery endured, inspiring future explorers and historians alike. Yet the city remained hidden, as if deliberately protecting the knowledge and history of its long-lost inhabitants, leaving only the echoes of discovery to haunt those who dared to search. Beyond the reach of maps and memory, the city of Z remains, its silence guarding secrets that may never be revealed. Kathleen Kenyon, Jericho. The ground beneath her feet held centuries of silence, each layer a faint trace of lives long vanished. Kathleen Kenyon's careful eyes scanned the excavation, noting the subtle shifts in soil that hinted at structures and settlements hidden for millennia. Every layer told a story, but one that demanded patience and meticulous recording, for even the smallest misstep could erase a century of evidence. She paused to consider the scale of the endeavour, aware that each measured scoop of earth might uncover something that reshaped understanding of human history in the Levant. The silence of the site was heavy, almost deliberate, as if the city itself waited to reveal its truths. She traced the edges of an exposed wall, its crumbling stones revealing the meticulous planning of a civilization far older than anyone had imagined. The stones, carefully aligned yet worn by time, suggested an architectural knowledge sophisticated beyond what conventional scholarship had attributed to the era. Kenyon examined the mortar, noting traces of reed and clay, and considered how people might have lived within these walls. The space between each layer hinted at centuries of occupation, abandonment, and renewal. Every angle and joint whispered of intentionality, hinting that this city had once been vibrant, deliberate, and, in some ways, still resisting the passage of time. Measuring the strata with precise tools, Kenyon began to understand the story embedded in the layers, each one offering a window into human activity that defied conventional timelines. Her stratigraphic techniques revealed evidence of habitation stretching back to the Neolithic period, challenging assumptions about when organized communities emerged in the region. Subtle variations in soil color and texture indicated burning, construction, or decay, each telling a story lost to written records. By carefully cataloguing these layers, she could reconstruct centuries of occupation, uncovering a civilization whose complexity hinted at knowledge and skill, far beyond expectations for the era. Pottery fragments and chipped tools lay scattered across the trench, telling silent tales of domestic life, trade, and craftsmanship that demanded careful interpretation. The ceramics varied in style and finish, suggesting influences from distant regions and indicating a network of contact and cultural exchange. Stone implements bore signs of repeated sharpening, implying specialized labor and a hierarchy of use. Kenyon handled each fragment delicately, knowing that even a tiny shard could illuminate the daily practices of people long gone. The objects, silent yet eloquent, spoke to her of a society both ordinary and extraordinary, one that had thrived in an environment that now appeared almost barren of evidence. The arrangement of early dwellings and defensive walls suggested a surprisingly sophisticated community, with knowledge of planning and social organization that modern scholars struggled to explain. Streets and pathways, discernible only through careful observation, hinted at coordination and foresight. Defensive embankments and towers implied awareness of external threats, perhaps from rival groups or environmental pressures. The city's layout revealed not chaos but deliberate design, a structured environment reflecting priorities of protection, habitation, and social cohesion. Kenyon marvelled at how such an early settlement could exhibit levels of organisation that rivaled much later communities. Sunlight fell across uneven surfaces, highlighting areas previously overlooked, and reminding Kenyon that even the most careful excavation could miss a single fragment capable of altering history. Shadows revealed depressions in the soil that marked former storage pits, hearths, or ceremonial spaces. She marked each finding meticulously, knowing that the full story depended on an accumulation of tiny details. Even subtle changes in soil composition suggested human intervention, whether intentional levelling, construction or disposal. The interplay of light and shadow made the past visible in fleeting moments, offering glimpses of patterns obscured by time yet patiently waiting for discovery. Burned layers and unusual deposits caught her attention, anomalies that hinted at events or practices whose meaning was lost to time, yet impossible to ignore. Charred remains suggested deliberate destruction or ritualistic activity, while unusual arrangements of stones and ash hinted at practices beyond everyday survival. Kenyon recorded these findings, aware that they could indicate periods of conflict, ceremonial observance, or environmental disaster. The enigmatic patterns challenged easy explanation, forcing her to reconcile the physical evidence with the broader narrative of human occupation she was uncovering. Each anomaly deepened the mystery of Jericho's earliest inhabitants. As she recorded measurements and sketches, the implications of her discoveries began to ripple through academic circles, challenging long-held assumptions about early human settlements. Evidence of permanent structures, organised streets and complex artefacts pushed back the timeline of urban development. The meticulous documentation allowed scholars to analyse and debate findings with clarity, yet many questions remained unresolved. Kenyon understood that her work did not merely add to knowledge, it demanded a rethinking of how history was constructed. The layers beneath her hand spoke volumes, yet their full meaning remained just beyond comprehension. Debates arose over the interpretation of her findings. Some scholars were hesitant to accept evidence that reshaped the chronology of civilization in the Levant. Critics questioned the accuracy of stratigraphic readings, the dating of artifacts, and the significance of burned layers. Others embraced the findings as revolutionary, highlighting how Kenyon's techniques illuminated a city whose complexity and antiquity had been underestimated. The scholarly contention underscored the tension between established narratives and emerging evidence, reflecting a larger challenge inherent in archaeology. The past rarely yields its secrets easily, and truth often waits beneath layers of skepticism. Kenyon's methods, painstaking and precise, set a new standard for archaeology, revealing patterns and structures that older techniques would have obscured entirely. By digging in defined layers, recording each context and avoiding destructive shortcuts, she reconstructed the city in a way previously thought impossible. This approach enabled her to uncover successive periods of occupation and discern social and cultural evolution over millennia. The careful methodology transformed Jericho from a collection of ruins into a narrative of human ingenuity, survival, and adaptation, demonstrating that technique was as vital as discovery itself. Long hours at the dig fostered an intimate understanding of the site, and her intuition guided the meticulous work that gradually unveiled the human story buried beneath layers of earth. Patterns became apparent only through repeated observation and reflection, as subtle clues connected with artifacts and architectural remnants. Kenyon's knowledge of stratigraphy allowed her to read the city as a layered manuscript, where each stratum represented decisions, events, and innovations of people long gone. The combination of patience, intellect, and empathy brought the past to life, yet still left room for the unknown to persist. Even after decades of study, certain chambers and walls resisted explanation, their origins and purposes hidden in a matrix of soil and history that refused to yield all its secrets. Some structures had no clear function, while others hinted at rituals or domestic life beyond current understanding. Artifacts appeared in contexts that defied easy categorization, suggesting cultural practices now invisible to the modern eye. The persistent ambiguity reminded Kenyon, and those who followed her work, that the city's story was incomplete. Jericho was a riddle written in clay and stone, solvable only in fragments, and perhaps never fully knowable. Deep below the surface, the ancient city endures, its secrets layered in silence, whispering truths that may never fully emerge. John Lloyd Stevens, Maya Ruins. Ancient stones jutted from the earth in patterns both deliberate and enigmatic, hinting at knowledge long hidden from view. John Lloyd Stevens, accompanied by the artist Frederick Catherwood, moved carefully through the dense undergrowth, attempting to piece together the grandeur of the city beneath. As they advanced, it became clear that each pyramid, terrace, and plaza had been positioned with intention, suggesting an understanding of geometry and planning far beyond what Stevens had expected. Every carved lintel, every aligned staircase, seemed to whisper a message from a civilization that had mastered both construction and symbolism centuries before European contact. Shadows traced across intricately carved facades revealed motifs that intertwined mythology, governance, and celestial observation. Stevens and Catherwood paused repeatedly to examine glyphs depicting rulers performing ceremonial duties, while animals and symbolic figures suggested a cosmology integrated into daily life. The carvings were both decorative and instructive, offering clues about societal hierarchy, religious ritual, and even agricultural cycles. Stevens noted patterns linking these glyphs with solar positions and seasonal changes, hinting at knowledge of astronomy embedded in public spaces. Catherwood's sketches meticulously captured nuances imperceptible to casual observers, preserving an invaluable record of Maya sophistication. Elevated pyramids and platforms rose with striking geometric precision, their alignment suggesting careful attention to both human and celestial reference points. The orientation of these structures often corresponded with solstices or equinoxes, demonstrating advanced observational skill. Stevens measured angles and dimensions, noting the integration of mathematical principles into monumental construction. Unlike other civilizations he'd studied, the Maya appeared to embed knowledge in both form and function, making each building a testament to intellectual as well as material mastery. The pyramids served ceremonial, social, and possibly astronomical purposes, a combination rarely encountered elsewhere in pre-Columbian America. Carved glyphs and hieroglyphic inscriptions conveyed information about calendars, historical events, and mythological narratives, though many remained indecipherable. Stevens recognized that the symbols were more than art. They encoded cycles, lineage, and possibly astronomical events. Certain glyphs appeared in sequence with specific architectural features, suggesting intentional placement to communicate layered meanings to those initiated in their culture. The combination of spatial and symbolic design hinted at a civilization that sought to preserve knowledge across generations, both publicly and in ways accessible only to a select few. These inscriptions left Stevens both fascinated and aware of the limitations of contemporary understanding. Plazas and thoroughfares revealed deliberate organization, connecting ceremonial spaces with residences in ways that indicated careful urban planning. Stevens observed that the spatial arrangement reflected social hierarchy, allowing elites oversight of communal areas while accommodating the movement of larger populations during gatherings or ritual activities. The avenues often aligned with specific temples or stelae, creating sightlines that emphasized religious or political authority. Such careful orchestration of space indicated not only architectural skill but also social intelligence, demonstrating the Maya's ability to plan cities that balance civic needs, ceremonial functions, and symbolic meaning in harmony with one another. Water management and agricultural planning were equally remarkable, with canals, terraces, and reservoirs integrated into the urban fabric. Stevens noted that aqueducts directed rainwater efficiently, while terraces maximized arable land without compromising structural integrity. The integration of natural features into urban design suggested an awareness of sustainability and environmental balance rarely seen in other contemporary civilizations. Observing the placement of water sources near plazas and temples, Stevens speculated that access to resources was both practical and ceremonial, potentially reinforcing social hierarchies while ensuring survival. The Maya had shaped their environment thoughtfully, leaving an enduring record of ingenuity and adaptation. Decorative friezes and ceremonial spaces revealed a sophisticated culture in which art, religion, and civic life intertwined seamlessly. Scenes depicted offerings, processions, and figures representing mythological beings, providing a glimpse into belief systems and societal values. Stevens recorded these features with care, noting how symbolism extended into architecture, creating a coherent narrative throughout the city. The imagery suggested that the Maya intentionally preserved cultural memory through design, ensuring that knowledge of cosmology, governance, and ritual was accessible to observers in both public and sacred spaces. Even with a detailed study, many interpretations remained tentative, preserving a sense of mystery that resisted full comprehension. Dense vegetation and jungle growth concealed portions of the city, creating both obstacles and protection for the ruins. Stevens and Catherwood navigated these areas cautiously, revealing hidden plazas, stairways, and glyphs that would have otherwise remained unknown. The overgrowth seemed to guard the city's secrets, forcing observers to slow their movements and pay careful attention to subtle alignments and patterns. Every partially cleared terrace or courtyard offered new insight into construction techniques, ceremonial planning, and urban design, but also reminded them that centuries of concealment had preserved elements intentionally, leaving parts of the city enigmatic and inaccessible. Repeated observation unveiled patterns of solar, lunar, and stellar alignment embedded into architecture and glyph placement. Temples and plazas oriented to specific points on the horizon suggested the Maya tracked celestial cycles with precision. Stevens noted correlations between building orientation and agricultural calendars, ritual ceremonies, and even mythological storytelling, demonstrating an integration of cosmology into daily life. Such sophistication indicated an intentional effort to connect human experience with cosmic cycles, blending practical needs with symbolic meaning. These discoveries reinforced the impression that the Maya encoded knowledge not only in objects and inscriptions, but in the very layout of the city itself. Stevens' detailed writings, paired with Catherwood's precise illustrations, created a comprehensive record that transcended what could be gleaned from the naked eye. Their documentation preserved architectural subtleties, glyph sequences, and spatial relationships that might otherwise have been lost to erosion and time. The combination of textual analysis and visual recording allowed contemporary and future scholars to explore the Maya's intellectual and cultural achievements with unprecedented clarity. Through this methodical process, the duo revealed a civilization that had embedded knowledge across multiple dimensions, symbolic, structural, and environmental, challenging assumptions about pre-Columbian sophistication. Initial skepticism greeted Stevens' reports, with many scholars doubting the complexity attributed to the Maya. Yet, as evidence accumulated through careful measurement, observation, and illustration, disbelief gave way to cautious acceptance. The city's design, glyphs, and ceremonial structures defied prior expectations, demonstrating an intricate understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and urban planning. Stevens' narrative conveyed both wonder and analytical rigor, convincing others that the Maya were capable of intellectual achievements that rivaled ancient civilizations elsewhere. Recognition came slowly, but eventually the city was acknowledged as a testament to human ingenuity, long before European influence reshaped the Americas. Even after extensive exploration, numerous glyphs, staircases, and ceremonial spaces resisted full interpretation, leaving parts of the city's story untold. Stevens realized that the Maya had deliberately encoded knowledge in ways that might remain forever partially hidden. Some inscriptions and alignments likely conveyed esoteric or ritual information intended for initiated observers, while others might have referenced cycles or events lost to memory. The incomplete understanding emphasized the enduring mystery of the civilization and reinforced the notion that much knowledge is preserved in fragments, challenging modern scholars to reconstruct meaning from what time has left intact. The city's enduring complexity and its combination of precision, symbolism, and integration with nature suggested a civilization that had achieved remarkable intellectual and cultural sophistication. Stevens and Catherwood could only document and interpret a fraction of what lay hidden, leaving modern readers and scholars to imagine the full scope of knowledge encoded in stone and urban layout. The ruins remained both revealing and elusive, offering insight while withholding complete understanding, as if the Maya intended their creations to provoke curiosity across generations. Time has worn away the city's edges, but the Maya left traces that challenge understanding and invite questions we may never answer. Thor Heyerdahl, Easter Island, Moai. Massive stone faces emerged from the horizon, their blank stares fixed toward the coast, leaving a lingering sense of human ambition frozen in time. Thor Heyerdahl, drawn to tales of the Moai, approached with a mix of awe and scientific curiosity, determined to uncover how these colossal figures had been conceived and constructed. Each step among the scattered statues revealed subtleties in posture, carving style, and erosion that hinted at layers of meaning, suggesting an intricate civilization whose memory was encoded in stone. Even the stillness of the island could not erase the suggestion that these figures had once been central to a vibrant society. The weight of each Moai, often exceeding 10 tons, posed a puzzle Heyerdahl could not ignore. He meticulously recorded dimensions, examining variations in height, head-to-body ratio, and eye sockets, seeking clues to their symbolic or functional purposes. The uniformity among some groups contrasted with deliberate differences in others, raising questions about social hierarchy, clan identity, or ritual importance. Every detail, from the angle of a chin to the flare of nostrils, seemed purposeful, conveying information about authority, lineage, or spiritual significance. These stones were both monument and message, designed to be observed and to inspire, yet leaving much shrouded in the unknown. Carving marks in the volcanic rock of Rano Raraku, where the statues were sculpted, revealed insights into tool use and labour organisation. Heyerdahl noted the grooves and unfinished features, attempting to infer how islanders could fashion massive figures from basalt using simple hand tools. Some surfaces bore smooth finishing, while others retained rough chisel marks, suggesting stages of construction and perhaps specialised teams of artisans. The quarry's arrangement hinted at systematic extraction and sequential sculpting, a process requiring both precision and coordination. For Heyerdahl, these observations reinforced the impression that the Moai were products of deliberate planning, yet left the exact methods tantalisingly beyond full modern replication. The positioning of the Moai along ceremonial platforms, or ahu, sparked questions about astronomical alignment, ritual practice, and urban planning. Heyerdahl observed patterns linking statues to coastal approaches, inland settlements, and sightlines that might correspond with solar, lunar, or stellar events. Some placements appeared practical, marking village boundaries or centralising ceremonial attention, while others suggested symbolic meaning lost to time. The combination of logistical planning and spiritual significance implied a society attuned to both the physical and metaphysical worlds. Even after careful study, the rationale for certain orientations remained ambiguous, reinforcing the Moai's aura of deliberate mystery. Elongated features, intricate carvings, and unusual proportions suggested symbolic encoding within the Moai themselves. Heyerdahl examined details such as oversized heads, elongated ears, and carved headdresses, considering how these might convey status, ancestry, or spiritual potency. Repeated motifs indicated shared cultural knowledge, while unique variations hinted at local identity or ritual distinction. The statues seemed to communicate across generations, transmitting meaning through form alone. Heyerdahl recognized that the sculptors had embedded complex information into each figure, blending artistry with communication, and that deciphering these subtle messages required attention to both context and pattern, a task as challenging as it was compelling. Transporting these colossal figures from quarry to platform presented perhaps the greatest enigma. Heyerdahl hypothesized that teams of workers might have used ropes and coordinated rocking motions to walk the statues upright, demonstrating a plausible yet labour-intensive method. Experimental archaeology later tested variations of this theory, revealing that such movement was feasible, though physically demanding. Even with modern ingenuity, replicating the effort requires insight into balance, force distribution, and human coordination. The mystery of transportation reinforced the Moai's aura, a civilization capable of monumental engineering in isolation, leaving subsequent generations to puzzle over a feat that blended ingenuity with ritual significance. Many statues had toppled or been partially buried, evidence of natural disaster, social upheaval, or ritual decommissioning. Heyerdahl observed broken bodies and scattered fragments, suggesting episodes of internal conflict, volcanic events, or ceremonial transitions. These remnants hinted at historical events otherwise lost to memory, and they posed questions about the society's resilience, priorities, and customs. Each fallen Moai seemed to hold a narrative frozen in stone, offering clues yet simultaneously concealing meaning. For Heyerdahl, the toppled statues reinforced the tension between what can be observed and what remains inaccessible, a recurring theme in the study of human history. Surface erosion and volcanic ash provided a surprising preservation of details in certain areas. Heyerdahl compared tool marks and chisel finishes, noting the consistency of technique across multiple generations. Some statues bore smoothing that suggested ceremonial care or symbolic emphasis, while others retained rough surfaces that may have served functional or transitional purposes. This variation indicated adaptability, craftsmanship, and intentionality. The preserved details allowed Heyerdahl to hypothesize sequences of construction, workshop organization, and artistic priorities, creating a layered understanding of how the islanders combined technical skill with cultural expression, even if the complete picture remained partially obscured. The Moai's orientation often connected statues with inland villages and ceremonial precincts, suggesting deliberate integration with social and spiritual life. Heyerdahl considered how positioning reinforced authority, ancestral veneration, and communal cohesion, creating a spatial network that conveyed power and memory. Line-of-sight relationships, relative heights, and ceremonial proximities indicated a complex cognitive approach to urban and ritual design. The physical landscape became a canvas for ideological expression, encoding societal values into the placement of monumental figures. Yet the precise significance of many alignments resisted full interpretation, leaving Heyerdahl and later researchers to speculate on the Moai's full range of symbolic and functional purposes. Heyerdahl's practical experiments with moving replica statues revealed both the plausibility and limits of human ingenuity. Using ropes, teams of volunteers simulated methods by which the Moai could have been transported and erected, demonstrating that ancient techniques were achievable without modern machinery. These experiments drew both praise and skepticism from the scientific community, highlighting the tension between hypothesis and certainty. The results suggested possibilities rather than definitive answers, leaving open questions about labour organisation, ritual practice, and the decision-making processes that guided the original construction and placement of the statues. Local legends and oral histories offered tantalising yet incomplete clues to the Moai's meaning and creation. Heyerdahl collected accounts describing ancestral origins, spiritual guardianship, and ceremonial significance, often intertwining metaphor with potential historical memory. These narratives provided a cultural context that aligned with some archaeological observations, yet resisted literal interpretation. The combination of story and stone suggested a civilization conscious of legacy, crafting objects that would communicate across generations in ways both observable and symbolic. Heyerdahl understood that deciphering the full intent of the Moai required balancing physical evidence with interpretive caution, always mindful of gaps in knowledge. Despite decades of research, many Moai remain enigmatic, their carvings, alignments, and construction methods continuing to challenge assumptions about prehistoric engineering and cultural sophistication. Heyerdahl's investigations illuminated potential techniques and societal patterns, yet the statue's purpose and meaning were never fully resolved. Some stones appeared to encode ancestral lineage, astronomical observation, or ritual authority, but the combination and intent of these features remained uncertain. The mystery persisted in plain sight, as if the island itself protected its secrets while offering glimpses of ingenuity, symbolism, and human ambition frozen in basalt. The enduring presence of the Moai evokes both wonder and uncertainty, a testament to the creativity and determination of a society long vanished. Heyerdahl's work highlighted the intersection of observation, experimentation, and cultural interpretation, demonstrating the value of curiosity grounded in evidence. Yet even with careful study, the statues retain an aura of the unknowable, leaving observers to contemplate how knowledge, belief, and labour can converge to produce works that endure beyond their creators' lifetimes. The Moai remain sentinels of a civilization that invites reflection, research, and speculation in equal measure. Silent and immovable, the Moai keep their secrets, daring generations to unravel a story that may never be fully known. Zahi Hawass, Giza Pyramid, Anomalies. Shadows stretched along the inner corridors of the Great Pyramid, hinting at voids and passages long unnoticed by generations of visitors, as if the structure itself concealed secrets beyond immediate perception. Zahi Hawass, drawn to these subtleties, approached with meticulous curiosity, recording measurements and observations with a careful hand. Even the slight differences in limestone texture or the faintest shift in alignment suggested intentionality by builders whose methods remain partially lost to history. Each narrow passage he examined seemed to whisper a hidden story, a deliberate enigma left for those patient enough to study its layers. Measuring instruments and modern scanning technologies became Hawass's eyes, revealing irregularities in stone placement, hidden cavities, and potential chambers, each discovery layered with both excitement and caution. Thermal imaging and muon radiography allowed him to see beyond the visible surface, detecting spaces that had remained sealed for millennia. these tools exposed anomalies invisible to earlier generations, raising questions about whether the void served structural, ritual, or symbolic purposes. Even minor differences in block size or orientation hinted at deliberate design choices, reinforcing the sense that the Great Pyramid's craters left subtle traces of their intentions embedded in its geometry. Tiny shifts in thermal patterns suggested voids behind massive limestone blocks, prompting meticulous investigation to determine whether these anomalies were structural necessities or deliberate spaces with hidden function. Hawass mapped every variation with precision, noting areas where temperature fluctuations indicated airflow or empty cavities. The data hinted at complexity beyond practical construction requirements, suggesting that some features might have been intended to conceal, protect, or communicate. Each observation deepened the mystery, revealing that even a single chamber could harbour secrets undetectable without modern methods. The combination of ancient skill and contemporary technology created a dialogue across millennia, one that remains incomplete. Robotic probes sent into narrow shafts unveiled surfaces carved with precision and inscriptions, faint enough to be nearly invisible, providing tantalizing fragments of information about the pyramid's construction and purpose. The microrobots transmitted images of hieroglyphs, symbolic markers, and surface irregularities that hinted at ritual significance, measurement systems, or ceremonial symbolism. Hawass documented every detail, noting that even tiny scratches or patterns might carry encoded meaning. These discoveries reinforced the notion that the builders had a comprehensive understanding of space, symbolism, and perhaps even acoustics, leaving modern scholars to piece together intentions that remain only partially understood. Some corridors seemed to defy traditional architectural logic, with abrupt changes in orientation or ceiling height, suggesting design choices that were intentional yet resistant to straightforward explanation. In certain chambers, walls narrowed inexplicably, while ceilings sloped or shifted angles without apparent structural necessity. Hawass considered whether these irregularities might reflect symbolic pathways, ritual sequences, or intentional concealment. Even minor anomalies could have served as markers or indicators, guiding the movements of priests or workers within the pyramid. The interplay between practical construction and symbolic design created a layered enigma, where each architectural quirk invited both speculation and reverence for the ingenuity of the builders. Hawass compared these structural peculiarities to historical texts, hieroglyphic evidence, and earlier archaeological records, seeking patterns that might indicate ritual significance, symbolic encoding, or lost construction knowledge. References to the pharaoh's journey, astronomical alignments, or divine protection appeared sporadically, leaving gaps that technology alone could not fill. By cross-referencing evidence, he aimed to interpret these voids not merely as architectural anomalies, but as expressions of a worldview in which space, ritual, and cosmic order were intertwined. Each connection suggested intentionality, while leaving enough ambiguity to preserve the pyramid's enduring aura of mystery. Variations in stone density and composition across chambers hinted at techniques unknown to common understanding, reinforcing the notion that the builders possessed knowledge or skills partially obscured by time. Some blocks displayed unusual hardness or unique grain structures, raising questions about quarrying and transport methods. Hawass noted these differences, comparing them to other pyramids and construction sites in Egypt. The anomalies challenged assumptions about ancient engineering, suggesting that labour, knowledge, and material selection were applied with a level of sophistication that modern observers could admire but not fully replicate. The mystery remained embedded in each stone, preserved through millennia. Inscriptions found within hidden spaces often contained cryptic references, numerical markers, or symbolic signs whose full meaning remained speculative, yet they pointed toward a civilization highly attuned to geometry and ritual alignment. Hawass documented minute carvings that hinted at calendrical knowledge, religious symbolism, or ceremonial instructions. These inscriptions, sometimes obscured by centuries of dust and erosion, suggested a dual purpose, functional and symbolic. They reinforced the sense that the pyramid was more than a tomb. It was a carefully orchestrated expression of cosmic, religious, and political principles, encoded in stone and preserved in silence. Scientific debates erupted around the purpose of anomalies, with some experts proposing functional ventilation, others suggesting ceremonial or symbolic intent, while Hawass documented evidence that supported multiple interpretations without asserting certainty. Scholars argued over voids' dimensions, alignments, and spatial relationships, highlighting how data could be read through practical, ritual, or astronomical lenses. Hawass's careful documentation respected each perspective, acknowledging uncertainty while emphasizing observable evidence. The debates underscored the challenge of interpreting structures designed to endure millennia, where partial understanding invites both insight and speculation. Access to certain voids remained physically impossible, necessitating reliance on remote scanning and modelling, and each new image or reading both illuminated and deepened the enigma of the pyramid's hidden architecture. Hawass collaborated with engineers and physicists to reconstruct models, simulate spatial relationships, and estimate dimensions of unreachable chambers. Each finding generated further questions. Were these spaces structural, ceremonial, or symbolic? Could they contain artifacts, inscriptions, or objects still unknown? The pyramid continued to reveal fragments of its story while keeping its core mysteries intact, demonstrating a deliberate and enduring complexity beyond ordinary comprehension. Public fascination surged as Hawass shared discoveries, yet controversy persisted over the accuracy and interpretation of anomalies, highlighting the tension between modern technology, scholarly rigor, and the enduring aura of ancient mystery. Media coverage, scholarly debate, and popular speculation created a dynamic environment in which findings were celebrated and questioned in equal measure. Hawass navigated these challenges carefully, presenting evidence while resisting overstatement. The pyramid's allure persisted precisely because of this tension, accessible enough to inspire curiosity, yet elusive enough to protect its deepest secrets from definitive explanation. With every investigation and expedition, many features of the Great Pyramid remain unexplained, its purpose and design continuing to defy conventional understanding and inviting ongoing investigation. Hawass's work revealed patterns and anomalies that challenge assumptions about engineering, ritual, and symbolism, but the full picture remains elusive. The juxtaposition of measurable evidence and enduring uncertainty creates a tension that captivates both scholars and the public. Each discovery provokes further questions, ensuring that the Great Pyramid continues to be a living enigma, an enduring testament to human ingenuity and the limits of knowledge. The enduring presence of the pyramid evokes both wonder and unease, a structure of stone and silence that has resisted total comprehension for millennia. Hawass's investigations underscore the intersection of ancient skill and modern curiosity, revealing the complexity of a civilization capable of monumental expression in both scale and symbolism. The anomalies remind us that human history is layered with deliberate concealment, encoded knowledge, and unanswered questions. Even in an age of technology and discovery, the Great Pyramid preserves mysteries that provoke awe, inviting each generation to look closer, measure more carefully, and wonder at what remains hidden. Within the silent stones, hidden chambers and cryptic inscriptions linger, as though daring us to uncover what even time has not yet revealed. Charles Leonard Woolley, Her Excavations. Layers of soil peeled back under careful hands, revealing traces of an ancient city where every fragment of clay or bone seemed to carry whispers of forgotten lives. It was here that Charles Leonard Woolley began his meticulous excavation of Ur. The dig revealed streets and structures buried beneath millennia of sediment, each layer telling a story of occupation, abandonment, and renewal. Woolley approached the site with a combination of rigorous methodology and an almost reverential curiosity, understanding that the city's hidden chambers and fragile artifacts might reveal insights into civilizations that had vanished long before modern memory. Tools tapped gently against the earth, sifting and brushing away millennia of sediment, as Woolley catalogued each find with painstaking precision. Every shard, every grain of residue was recorded in detailed notes and sketches, ensuring that nothing of potential significance was overlooked. He recognized that even small artifacts, a fragment of pottery, a broken seal, a twisted piece of metal, could illuminate administrative practices, trade, or ritual behaviors. Each moment of discovery heightened the sense of connection to the people who once walked these streets, yet also deepened the mystery of why Ur had risen and fallen so completely from memory. In the quiet hum of the dig, golden ornaments and intricately carved jewellery emerged, gleaming faintly through layers of dust. These treasures, often placed in tombs alongside human remains, spoke of wealth, artistry, and ceremonial importance. Woolley carefully photographed and preserved each object, noting patterns of design that suggested both local creativity and influence from distant regions. The richness of the materials and the skill of the craftsmanship challenged contemporary assumptions about early Mesopotamian societies, indicating that Ur was a hub of culture, trade, and technological sophistication that remains partially unexplained even today. Beneath the surface, Woolley uncovered tombs containing ceremonial objects, musical instruments, and delicate figurines, each carefully positioned and preserved in ways that suggested deliberate intention rather than random burial. The Lyre of Ur, for instance, revealed strings and intricate inlays depicting scenes of animals and ritual life, providing rare insight into the aesthetic sensibilities of a civilization otherwise known primarily through clay tablets. Every placement of objects appeared deliberate, hinting at belief systems, social hierarchies, or symbolic gestures whose full meaning was tantalizingly inaccessible, yet whose presence resonated across time with subtle and profound significance. Even minor fragments of pottery or engraved seals conveyed remarkable sophistication, pointing to administrative systems and symbolic communication whose full meaning remained elusive but tantalizingly precise. Woolley documented patterns in the markings, noting similarities across tombs and households, indicating an organized society with conventions that transcended individual families or sites. The seals and ceramics demonstrated both artistic skill and functional purpose, capturing the duality of objects as tools and conveyors of meaning. Each discovery, however small, raised new questions about Ur's governance, economy, and culture, suggesting a civilization whose complexity exceeded contemporary expectations and modern comprehension. Woolley's stratigraphic approach revealed successive layers of occupation, showing that Ur had developed complex social and religious structures far earlier than many scholars had anticipated. As each layer was carefully removed, he could see the evolution of construction techniques, burial practices, and community organization over centuries. These observations challenged conventional timelines of technological development in Mesopotamia and hinted at a society that maintained continuity of tradition while adapting to environmental and political changes. The stratigraphy offered a tangible map of human activity over time, and Woolley's methodical documentation ensured that even the smallest anomalies would contribute to a larger understanding of Ur's enduring mystery. The royal cemetery of Ur contained tombs with multiple burials, some accompanied by servants or offerings, indicating a society deeply invested in ritual and hierarchy. Woolley recorded evidence of elaborate burial practices, from bodies arranged with specific orientation to items placed in precise locations around the deceased. The scale and care of these tombs suggested that the afterlife held significant cultural importance and that status in life extended beyond death. Yet, despite careful observation, the underlying reasoning for the inclusion of certain objects or individuals remained unclear, leaving gaps in our understanding that continue to intrigue archaeologists and challenge assumptions about the values of early civilizations. Artifacts of foreign origin suggested that trade and cultural exchange were far more extensive than previously understood, leaving Woolley and his team to wonder how knowledge and craft had travelled across regions now separated by centuries and deserts. Materials such as lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and carnelian from distant lands arrived in Ur through complex networks, indicating long-distance connections. The presence of these items, often within tombs, suggested both prestige and symbolic significance, hinting at a world far more interconnected than might appear from scattered historical records. Woolley noted these pieces as both evidence of trade and as silent testaments to Ur's importance in a wider ancient world. Each discovery prompted careful documentation, from the angle of inlaid designs on a lyre to the precise arrangement of burial goods, emphasizing that the ancient city had been deliberately planned and symbolically organized. Woolley's notebooks are filled with meticulous sketches, measurements, and notes on orientation and positioning, reflecting both technical skill and interpretive insight. Patterns began to emerge, suggesting a culture highly attentive to ritual, hierarchy, and symbolic expression, yet many details remained opaque. The juxtaposition of observable evidence with interpretive uncertainty created a tension that fueled scholarly fascination, encouraging further excavation and analysis while preserving the city's enigmatic aura. Scholarly debate accompanied every report as experts questioned interpretations of ritual practices, social hierarchies, and the significance of seemingly minor items, highlighting the challenges of reconstructing a civilization that had vanished without written explanation. Woolley navigated these debates carefully, providing detailed records and avoiding speculation where evidence was absent. Each contested interpretation revealed how much was still unknown about her and how much could be inferred only cautiously. This tension between concrete discovery and interpretive uncertainty became central to the narrative of with each artifact representing both a clue and a reminder of the limits of human understanding. Woolley faced practical difficulties as well, from fragile artifacts to the shifting sands and heat of southern Mesopotamia. Yet each obstacle underscored the fragility and resilience of human achievement, preserving mysteries that survived millennia. Excavation required constant attention to preservation techniques, careful handling of delicate objects, and adaptation to environmental challenges. Despite these hardships, each intact artifact was a triumph, a piece of human history rescued from oblivion. The persistence of such treasures amid environmental hazards emphasized the durability of culture and ingenuity, reminding modern scholars that even in destruction, civilizations leave enduring traces that continue to speak across time. Even after years of excavation, gaps remained in understanding Ur's society, its technological knowledge, and the intentions behind its most elaborate tombs, leaving unanswered questions that continue to intrigue archaeologists and historians alike. Woolley's discoveries revealed remarkable sophistication, yet for every artifact recovered, another layer of mystery persisted. Scholars continue to debate the purpose, origin, and meaning of many items, from ceremonial instruments to intricately decorated jewellery. These gaps maintain the allure of as a site of wonder and discovery, where every excavation raises both answers and new questions, sustaining the city's enigmatic presence in the historical imagination. The enduring legacy of reminds us that human history is composed not only of monuments and artifacts, but also of silences, absences, and enigmas deliberately or inadvertently preserved over centuries. Woolley's meticulous work revealed glimpses of a sophisticated civilization, while leaving the core of its social, religious, and cultural knowledge tantalizingly inaccessible. Each artifact and tomb tells a story partially told, inviting interpretation while withholding full understanding. Stands as both an archaeological treasure and a perpetual riddle, challenging us to probe, measure, and imagine the lives of those who built, inhabited, and honoured this city long before memory. The necropolis of stretches in silence, its treasures and tombs concealing secrets that no hand, however careful, has yet fully deciphered. Reiche and Nazca lines. From the vantage of a small aircraft, the Nazca Desert spreads below like a canvas of impossible precision, where lines stretch for miles and figures of animals and geometric shapes emerge from the parched earth. Viewed from the ground, these geoglyphs are nearly invisible, yet from above they coalesce into patterns of startling clarity, their scale and precision defying expectations of prehistoric engineering. Maria Reich, captivated by the first glimpses of these formations in the 1940s, recognized that understanding them would require a lifetime of observation, measurement, and patience, as each line might hold clues to the minds of a vanished people. Among these enigmatic patterns, Reiche devoted decades to careful observation, methodically walking, measuring, and documenting each geoglyph, determined to understand the intentions of a civilization that left no written explanation. She approached the desert as both scientist and guardian, aware that erosion, wind, and human encroachment threatened the fragile formations. Each day she traced paths across the sand, noting every deviation and curve, building meticulous maps that recorded not only the size and orientation of each figure, but also the subtle relationships between seemingly disconnected lines. Her devotion became a quiet obsession, sustained by curiosity and reverence for a culture that had vanished centuries before. Using simple tools and painstaking calculation, she established grids and reference points across the desert floor, translating enormous ground patterns into maps and diagrams that revealed the astonishing accuracy of the lines. Reiche often used ropes, stakes, and wooden measuring devices to create scaled representations, noting angles and proportions with meticulous care. Her work demonstrated that the lines were not haphazard scratches but deliberate designs, maintaining proportion over hundreds of meters. Through her methodical recording, she revealed a system of order that required planning, knowledge of geometry and coordination, evidence of a society far more sophisticated than previously assumed, leaving unanswered questions about how such skill had been achieved. The hummingbird, monkey and spider figures captured Reiche's fascination, their proportions maintained across vast distances, suggesting a planning and skill that challenged assumptions about prehistoric societies in the region. Each animal figure appeared as if frozen in motion, yet they were precise to the centimetre over stretches of hundreds of metres. Reiche noted the consistent orientation of these figures and their relation to nearby lines and trapezoids, hypothesizing connections to ritual or symbolic significance. The creatures seemed more than decoration, they were statements or messages, carefully etched into the earth with intention and respect for scale, inspiring both wonder and profound curiosity about the minds that created them. Not all patterns represented creatures. Geometric forms, spirals, trapezoids, and intersecting lines hinted at purposes beyond representation, with scale and alignment that defied casual observation and invited speculation. Reiche meticulously catalogued these shapes, comparing them for symmetry, orientation, and repetition, recognizing an underlying logic in their placement. She suggested that some lines might serve as ceremonial pathways or markers for sacred rituals, while others may have encoded symbolic meanings lost to time. The combination of abstract geometry and figurative imagery conveyed a sophisticated visual language, one that blended artistry, utility, and possibly astronomical or spiritual knowledge, leaving the full interpretation tantalizingly out of reach. Reiche noted that certain lines aligned with celestial phenomena, including solstices and star risings, raising questions about whether the geoglyphs functioned as an astronomical calendar or ceremonial guide. By cross-referencing line orientations with solar and lunar cycles, she found correlations that hinted at a deliberate connection between the Earth and sky. Some trapezoidal lines appeared to mark specific points where celestial events could be observed from the desert floor. These alignments suggested a culture attuned to the heavens, blending practical knowledge with ritual practice. Yet, even after decades of analysis, the purpose of many lines remained enigmatic, resisting definitive interpretation and fueling the ongoing mystery of the Nazca lines. Walking the desert, she carefully preserved fragile sections of the lines, protecting them from erosion, animal activity, and human interference, aware that each step could erase centuries of unbroken patterning. Reiche championed legal protection for the Nazca lines, advocating for measures that would prevent agricultural development and tourism from damaging the delicate markings. She documented not only the figures themselves, but also the threats to their survival, producing records that became essential for conservation. Her attention to preservation reinforced the sense that these lines were not only archaeological artifacts, but living reminders of human intention, requiring constant care to ensure that future generations could witness the scale and precision of these enigmatic creations. Critics often dismissed her theories, yet Reiche remained steadfast, recording every angle, length, and proportion, convinced that the work of ancient hands had a significance still hidden to modern eyes. She endured skepticism from archaeologists who questioned whether her astronomical hypotheses were valid, and from locals who struggled to appreciate the desert from the perspective she advocated. Despite these challenges, Reiche continued her surveys, employing rigorous measurement and observation rather than conjecture. Her persistence ensured that the geoglyphs were documented in extraordinary detail, transforming a landscape of inscrutable scratches into a map of human endeavour and leaving a legacy of patient investigation unmatched in modern archaeology. Aerial photography became a crucial ally, revealing connections and patterns invisible from the ground as lines converged and diverged in ways that suggested deliberate spatial and symbolic planning. From above, geometric formations intersected with animal figures, creating a tapestry of lines and symbols that hinted at a larger integrated design. Reiche analysed these aerial images, overlaying sketches and maps to reveal previously unnoticed relationships. The combination of ground-based measurement and aerial observation allowed her to piece together the complexity of the Nazca lines, demonstrating that their creators had an understanding of scale, proportion, and perspective that modern viewers could only approximate, and leaving unanswered questions about how these skills were developed. The scale of the geoglyphs posed endless puzzles, with some figures spanning hundreds of meters and requiring coordination that implied communal effort, advanced surveying knowledge, and precise execution. Reiche's measurements revealed that the largest figures could not have been drawn without pre-planned grids, team coordination, and detailed observation. Such coordination implied both social organisation and technical understanding, including methods to maintain straight lines over uneven terrain. These insights suggested that the geoglyphs were more than art. They were statements of collective knowledge, possibly linked to ritual or cultural memory. Yet the exact intentions of the people who created them remain elusive, their motivations encoded only in lines and shapes preserved on the desert floor. Reiche's meticulous diaries and maps preserved not only the geoglyphs themselves, but also the evidence of a lost culture's obsession with order, symbolism, and perhaps communication with the forces beyond their visible world. Each recorded measurement, sketch, and note revealed patterns and proportions that hint at meanings inaccessible to modern observers. Her documentation served as both a scientific record and an interpretive guide, bridging centuries between the ancient Nazca culture and contemporary understanding. The combination of precision, dedication, and insight allowed the patterns to survive the encroachment of time, wind, and human activity, creating a legacy that continues to challenge archaeologists and inspire fascination with civilizations whose knowledge remains partially obscured. Through years of careful study, the purpose of the Nazca lines remained unresolved, and Reiche's work continues to inspire both reverence and speculation, a reminder of how human ingenuity can leave questions for eternity. Scholars debate whether the lines were ceremonial pathways, astronomical markers, or symbolic messages intended for deities, yet no single explanation accounts for their complexity. The enduring mystery preserves the allure of the Nazca Desert, drawing researchers who attempt to reconcile precision, scale, and intention across time. Reiche's dedication ensured that every line, curve, and figure was meticulously preserved, offering a window into human creativity while leaving the ultimate meaning tantalizingly just beyond reach. The desert itself becomes a witness to human ambition and intellect, where lines etched into parched earth defy both time and comprehension. Through Maria Reiche's unwavering study, these geoglyphs endure as a testament to patience, observation, and the desire to uncover intention from the distant past. Each line invites questions about societal organization, astronomical knowledge, and symbolic expression, while every preserved measurement allows modern observers to glimpse a civilization's sophistication. Her work embodies a dialogue across centuries, a conversation between a meticulous scholar and a people who chose to leave enduring, enigmatic marks upon the world. The Nazca lines lie vast and silent under the sun, each line a deliberate whisper from a civilization whose voice can still be felt but never fully heard. James Mellaart, Catalhoyuk. Amid the undulating plains of central Anatolia, a settlement thrived long before recorded history, its labyrinth of earthen structures and clustered homes hinting at lives both ordinary and extraordinary, later revealed layer by layer through James Mellaart's meticulous excavations. Narrow alleys and low walls created a tightly woven urban fabric, where smoke from countless hearths mingled with the scent of baked clay, and daily sounds, grinding, hammering, and children's footsteps would have filled the settlement. Mellaart's work gradually lifted the veil on this Neolithic world, revealing a community whose domestic routines, artistic expression, and symbolic systems challenged modern assumptions about early human complexity. Within the tightly packed dwellings, fragments of daily life offered vivid insights. Pottery shards bore fingerprints of their creators, grinding stones hinted at diets dominated by cereal, and hearths retained traces of meals long vanished. Tools of stone and bone revealed craft specialization, from weaving to flint knapping, while worn floor surfaces suggested habitual pathways for movement and work. Even in these small, utilitarian objects, one could sense intentionality and rhythm, the invisible pattern of Neolithic life. Through these remnants, Mellaart could reconstruct not only domestic activities, but the subtle social interactions that defined a community surviving for centuries in an unforgiving environment. Walls adorned with murals and painted motifs revealed a symbolic world intertwined with the daily existence. Bulls, leopards, and geometric patterns appeared across rooms, sometimes repeated in sequences or paired with abstract shapes whose meaning remains debated. The vibrancy of pigments, reds, blacks, and ochres, had endured millennia, preserving echoes of ceremonies, beliefs, or mythologies that modern observers can only partially interpret. These images hinted at a culture capable of complex thought, of conceptualizing forces or beings beyond the material world. Mellaart documented them meticulously, noting composition, layering, and wear, emphasizing that their placement and style were far from accidental. Between living spaces, burials were carefully integrated under floors and into alcoves. Individuals were interred in fetal positions, accompanied by ornaments, beads, and small figurines, suggesting both reverence and protection. The proximity of the dead to living areas implied a cosmology where ancestors or spirits maintained an active presence in daily life. Figurines often depicted women, sometimes in stylized form, their exact significance remaining elusive but possibly tied to fertility or ritual practice. Each discovery challenged conventional notions of early human societies, revealing a sophistication of symbolic thought and ceremonial awareness that blurred the line between life and death. Interconnected rooms, often entered through rooftops rather than streets, created a settlement that functioned both vertically and horizontally. Roof terraces acted as thoroughfares, storage areas, and communal spaces, demanding careful negotiation and awareness from inhabitants. The architecture's complexity, with overlapping access points and interlocking dwellings, suggested planning, perhaps for defense, climate adaptation, or social organization. Mellaart observed that this pattern of living reflected both practicality and subtle social control, where private and communal activities were delineated not by walls alone, but by careful spatial design that encoded the rhythms and hierarchies of Neolithic life. The settlement's walls, floors, and rooms bore repeated patterns, suggesting symbolic meaning woven into its very design. Murals, figurines, and floor arrangements often followed sequences or motifs, implying ritual or mnemonic functions that remain speculative. The repetition of animal forms, abstract shapes, and geometric configurations suggested a visual language, one whose rules and logic were intimately familiar to inhabitants yet largely opaque today. Mellaart noted that even mundane objects, from cooking stones to storage vessels, might carry symbolic weight when viewed in context. These subtle arrangements reinforced the sense that Catalhoyuk was more than a functional settlement. It was a consciously ordered world. Excavations led by Mellaart revealed layers upon layers of occupation spanning centuries. Each stratum contained evidence of domestic life, symbolic art, and ritual practice, showing continuity and evolution within the settlement. Mellaart's careful documentation, sketches, and photography preserved nuances of room design, artifact placement, and mural detail that might otherwise have been lost. These records allowed subsequent archaeologists to interpret shifts in spatial organization, material culture, and ceremonial practice over time. In examining these layers, Mellaart uncovered a picture of a society capable of adaptation, complex social coordination, and sustained cultural expression far beyond what contemporaneous civilizations elsewhere demonstrated. Hidden corners and niches suggested spaces reserved for ritual or ceremonial activity. Small altars, animal bones, and painted walls hinted at practices whose meaning has resisted modern interpretation. These areas were often integrated within domestic dwellings, suggesting that sacred activity and everyday life were not separate spheres, but coexisted intimately. Mellaart documented how these spaces were deliberately designed, their positioning reflecting both accessibility and privacy, providing insight into the ways in which belief, ritual, and social norms intersected in Neolithic society. The precise intent of these areas remains speculative, yet their deliberate construction conveys the presence of organized belief systems. Leopards, bulls, birds, and abstract motifs were repeatedly depicted across the settlement, frequently accompanying human figures. Their frequency and placement suggested that they were part of a symbolic system understood by inhabitants but largely opaque to outsiders. Some motifs may have recorded seasonal events, mythic narratives, or social allegiances, while others could have served as protective or commemorative symbols. The consistency of these designs across multiple dwellings points to shared cultural knowledge, hinting at a network of meaning linking homes, families, and community spaces that defies easy interpretation centuries later. Differences in room size, artifact distribution, and decorative elaboration indicated varying social roles or status. Larger rooms contained more elaborate murals and numerous artifacts, possibly reserved for extended families or ritual specialists, while smaller rooms were simpler, serving as living quarters or storage. Burial placement and grave goods reinforced this hierarchy, revealing a nuanced social order encoded into the physical fabric of the settlement. Mellaart's analysis suggested that Catalhoyuk was neither egalitarian nor rigidly hierarchical, but reflected flexible social arrangements mediated by space, ritual practice, and symbolic expression. The surrounding landscape shaped both survival and cultural development. Fertile plains allowed the cultivation of cereals and pulses, while nearby rivers provided water for agriculture and daily life. Hills and terraces offered natural defense and strategic vantage points, influencing the settlement's orientation and architecture. Evidence of animal domestication and hunting indicates a mixed subsistence strategy, blending farming, foraging, and pastoral activities. Mellaart emphasized that understanding the environmental context was crucial to interpreting Catalhoyuk's social structure, economic practices, and ritual life, as the inhabitants were intimately connected to the land they inhabited. Even decades after Mellaart's first uncovering of Catalhoyuk, many mysteries remain. The meaning of murals, the significance of buried figurines, and the full intent behind interlocking dwellings continue to elude scholars. Archaeologists debate the purpose of symbolic motifs, the nature of social hierarchy, and the role of ritual spaces within domestic life. Despite careful excavation and analysis, the settlement retains an aura of enigma, suggesting that only fragments of its knowledge and belief system survived. Each discovery offers a tantalizing glimpse of the past, while leaving fundamental questions unanswered, preserving the sense of wonder that first drew Mellaart to the site. The walls, floors, and painted surfaces of Catalhoyuk whisper fragments of a world that cannot be fully understood, leaving shadows of its people's intentions suspended in time. Robert Koldewey, Babylon. The ruins of Babylon rise faintly from the plains of modern-day Iraq, a city once whispered of in myths and epic tales, its grandeur largely lost to millennia of sand and time. Among the first to confront its scale with methodical precision was Robert Koldewey, a German architect turned archaeologist, whose work in the early 20th century unveiled the extraordinary ambition of Mesopotamian builders. Koldewey's surveys revealed towering walls, gateways, and canals, whose dimensions suggested a civilization whose planning and execution rivaled later empires, hinting that the city's full story might extend beyond the written records preserved on clay tablets. Excavating the famed Ishtar Gate, Koldewey documented glazed bricks adorned with lions, dragons, and mythical beasts, each detail so finely executed that it conveyed not only power, but an intricate understanding of symbolism. The vibrancy of the colours, painstakingly preserved through centuries, seemed almost otherworldly under the harsh Mesopotamian sun. Beyond their aesthetic appeal, these reliefs demonstrated advanced knowledge of construction techniques, alignment, and architectural foresight that challenged contemporary ideas about the capabilities of ancient peoples, prompting Koldewey to record measurements and notes with unprecedented care. Through the rubble and dust, Babylon's foundations revealed a tale of forgotten complexity. Koldewey discovered multi-layered walls and underground chambers that suggested engineering sophistication, often underestimated by modern historians. Some walls, he noted, were composed of mud bricks fired to extreme hardness, designed to withstand floods and the shifting alluvium of the Euphrates. The layout hinted at both defensive strategy and ceremonial intent, a deliberate intertwining of functionality and symbolism, where every turn of a corridor and placement of a relief seemed imbued with purpose, leaving the observer to wonder whether Babylon's builders sought to preserve knowledge for reasons beyond immediate survival. Water management appeared equally meticulous. Koldewey's team traced canals and reservoirs that fed the city with an almost modern efficiency, enabling agriculture and sustaining a dense population in a harsh climate. The Euphrates itself was manipulated to flow in harmony with the city's needs, while bridges and levees demonstrated engineering awareness often thought absent in the ancient world. Koldewey speculated in his diaries about the extent of technical knowledge required to conceive and maintain such infrastructure, noting that it spoke to a civilization not only rich in ambition, but potentially guided by principles that modern scholars might never fully decode. The famed processional way, which led to the Ishtar Gate, revealed another layer of intention and artistry. Koldewey meticulously catalogued the bas-reliefs lining the path, depicting kings, soldiers, and mythic creatures, and recorded inscriptions that celebrated victories and divine favour. The sheer scale of the avenue suggested that it was more than a ceremonial route. It functioned as a theatre of power, a narrative in stone meant to impress and perhaps intimidate visitors. Each brick was a story, each carving a deliberate statement, leaving Koldewey and later generations questioning the depth of knowledge encoded in every measured step along its length. Koldewey's excavations uncovered the Ziggurat Temenanki, a structure later associated with the biblical Tower of Babel. Its immense base and layered construction required precise planning, and Koldewey's careful measurements revealed dimensions far beyond what contemporary builders of his era could easily comprehend. The ziggurat's scale and symmetry suggested not only ambition, but a sophisticated understanding of weight distribution, architectural balance, and ceremonial significance, which led Koldewey to record his astonishment in journals that survive today. Scholars have since debated whether such structures were purely symbolic or part of a lost scientific understanding. In the residential quarters, Koldewey observed traces of everyday life, clay tablets with cuneiform writing, household pottery, and remnants of food storage. Yet even these mundane artifacts conveyed unexpected knowledge. Some containers were standardized in shape and size, indicating an organized economy, while certain tablets recorded transactions with precision that hinted at advanced literacy and bureaucratic sophistication. Koldewey noted that the meticulousness of these systems, though hidden in plain sight, suggested an intelligence that valued record-keeping and organization to a degree rarely attributed to civilizations of the 2nd millennium BCE. Koldewey's findings extended to the fortifications surrounding Babylon. Walls that rose over 50 feet in height enclosed the city in vast loops, with towers and bastions placed at precise intervals. Excavations revealed that bricks bore inscriptions of the king's names and titles, but also symbols whose purpose remains ambiguous. Koldewey speculated that some of these markings might represent standardized measures, warnings, or even a coded system of information preserved in stone, for reasons that elude modern interpretation. The idea that such knowledge might have been intentionally hidden adds a layer of tension to the archaeological record. The gardens often associated with Babylon, though long debated, also left traces that Koldewey documented with care. He described remnants of terraces, irrigation channels, and plantings that suggested botanical sophistication and an understanding of microclimates. If these were indeed the fabled hanging gardens, then Koldewey's work offered evidence that ancient engineers had achieved feats combining artistry, technical skill, and environmental management that modern assumptions often underestimate. The convergence of legend, archaeology, and engineering expertise created a sense that Babylon held secrets only partially understood. Koldewey faced considerable challenges in preserving his work amid shifting sands and political instability. Many structures were fragile, and excavation itself risked damage. Yet his meticulous notes, photographs, and scaled reconstructions preserved a record of Babylon's grandeur that continues to inspire awe. Even in areas where the ruins have vanished, his documentation allows modern scholars to trace the ingenuity embedded in the city's design. Koldewey's insistence on precise methodology ensured that what he uncovered could be studied and questioned for generations, leaving open the possibility of revelations still waiting beneath the soil. Beyond the tangible, Koldewey sensed an intangible order in Babylon, a design logic that transcended conventional human understanding. The combination of monumental architecture, engineering prowess, and artistic symbolism suggested to him a civilization that possessed knowledge deliberately preserved, perhaps encoded to withstand the erosion of time and memory. Koldewey's diaries hint at an unease with this discovery, an acknowledgement that some aspects of Babylon's creation might never be fully interpretable, as if the city itself contained warnings or truths not meant for casual comprehension. As the city slowly surrendered its secrets under Koldewey's guidance, the archaeologist recognized that Babylon was more than the sum of its ruins. Every wall, every gate, and every tablet seemed to pulse with intentionality, offering glimpses of a civilization that may have known truths lost to history. His careful work preserved these fragments for the modern era, yet the deeper meanings of their construction and arrangement remain tantalizingly out of reach. The very act of excavation hinted at knowledge deliberately hidden, waiting for minds both patient and discerning to encounter it. Koldewey left Babylon with a profound awareness that the city was both revealed and concealed, its grandeur a puzzle of monumental precision and enigmatic intent. His findings challenged the assumptions of his contemporaries and reshaped the study of ancient Mesopotamia, yet even a century later scholars continue to grapple with the implications of what he uncovered, confronting questions that refuse to yield simple answers. Some doors of Babylon remained forever closed, their secrets woven into walls of stone and brick, daring the curious to probe deeper, yet offering no promise of understanding. Michael Ventris, Deciphering Linear B. Dusty storerooms in Crete and mainland Greece held stacks of clay tablets, each etched with a script that had defied explanation for centuries, until Michael Ventris approached them not as mere artifacts, but as a code waiting to be unlocked. The inscriptions, discovered decades earlier in palatial centres such as Knossos and Pylos, were filled with repeating sequences and enigmatic symbols. Ventris, a young British architect and amateur linguist, became captivated by the tantalising possibility that these tablets were not merely administrative tools, but keys to understanding a vanished civilization, one whose complexity exceeded even the most ambitious modern reconstructions. Before Ventris, generations of linguists and archaeologists had attempted to decipher Linear B, yet each effort ended in frustration, leaving the symbols as silent witnesses to a vanished civilization. Scholars had speculated that the script represented an unknown language, or a purely ceremonial code, yet no systematic reading had emerged. These failures only deepened the aura of mystery surrounding the tablets, and many assumed the Mycenaean civilization's written records were forever inaccessible. The challenge posed by Linear B was compounded by the fragmentary nature of the tablets, some cracked or partially destroyed, yet each fragment seemed to carry the potential for revelation hidden within its strokes. Ventris's unusual combination of architectural training and linguistic curiosity allowed him to see patterns others overlooked, approaching the tablets with both a designer's eye and a cryptographer's patience. He meticulously catalogued repeated signs, noting frequency, position, and context, as if the tablets themselves were a maze and he was deciphering the route through their symbolic corridors. Unlike prior scholars, Ventris imagined that the writing might encode a language familiar to later Greeks, a radical hypothesis that required both audacity and careful verification. Each new correlation he proposed was tested against existing inscriptions, a delicate process that balanced intuition with meticulous scholarship. The characters themselves were alien in form, clusters of strokes and curves that resisted conventional logic, as though intentionally designed to conceal knowledge from the uninitiated. Some symbols were pictographic, others abstract, and their combinations varied with apparent regularity and complexity. Ventris recognized that the Mycenaeans had devised a sophisticated system that reflected both the sound and meaning of words, a dual-layered logic unlike the scripts of contemporary civilizations. The enigmatic appearance of Linear B lent the tablets a cryptic aura, suggesting that understanding them was not merely a matter of linguistics, but an intellectual excavation of an entire worldview encoded in clay. By comparing repeating sequences, Ventris began to detect an internal rhythm, a hidden order beneath the apparent chaos, revealing the faint pulse of an ancient administrative mind. Certain clusters appeared alongside place names, personal titles, or quantities of goods, hinting at their phonetic or semantic values. Slowly, a framework emerged. Patterns indicated recurring syllables, potential grammatical structures, and even rudimentary sentence forms. This painstaking process required extreme concentration, often taking months to confirm a single hypothesis. Yet each small breakthrough reinforced the idea that the Mycenaeans had left behind a deliberate and intelligible record that, if carefully read, could illuminate the workings of a vanished empire. Working alongside John Chadwick introduced rigor and linguistic discipline, yet every proposed breakthrough met skepticism. The academic world was hesitant to accept that a young architect could rival seasoned scholars. Chadwick's philological expertise complemented Ventris's analytical flair, turning conjecture into structured argumentation. Together, they tested theories, cross-referenced inscriptions, and consulted archaeological contexts, all while navigating the resistance of institutions and colleagues who doubted the feasibility of decipherment. The tension between daring hypothesis and methodological caution heightened the sense of suspense, as though each step forward in decoding Linear B risked disproof, yet promised unparalleled insight into Mycenaean society. Step by step, syllables began to take shape, symbols corresponded to sounds, and fragments of Mycenaean Greek emerged, turning abstract marks into a tangible bridge to the past. The revelation was methodical rather than instantaneous. Months of patient analysis gradually revealed vocabulary for commodities, personnel, and ritual items. Ventris's insight that Linear B was an early form of Greek overturned long-held assumptions about the chronology of the language and the sophistication of Bronze Age administration. Each deciphered tablet became a window into a civilization that had once thrived across palatial centres, its order, governance, and daily life glimpsed for the first time in more than 3 millennia. The tablets revealed glimpses of palace life, inventories of goods, and records of rituals, hinting at the sophistication and orderliness of a culture whose brilliance had long been obscured. Ventris and Chadwick documented cattle counts, quantities of oil, lists of garments, and temple offerings, revealing a society that combined bureaucratic precision with ceremonial observance. The level of detail suggested careful oversight and centralized administration, contradicting assumptions of primitive or loosely organized governance. Yet, as much as the records illuminated, they also concealed. Gaps and lacunae left whole dimensions of Mycenaean life in shadow, creating an enduring tension between what could be known and what remained forever hidden. Many records were incomplete, leaving tantalizing gaps and fragmented narratives, as if the Mycenaeans had left a puzzle deliberately unfinished, teasing those who sought to understand. Broken tablets, missing sequences, and enigmatic symbols resisted final interpretation, hinting at rituals, political structures, and social dynamics lost to history. Ventris's decipherment exposed a partial view of palace administration, but the silences of the tablets were as compelling as the words themselves. Scholars continue to debate the meaning of these fragments, considering whether the omissions were accidental or intentional, and the sense of mystery deepened with every newly studied inscription. Ventris's decipherment was itself a delicate excavation, a mental archaeology in which logic, intuition, and careful observation unearthed the thought patterns of a vanished society. Each recognition of a syllable or word required the blending of probability, linguistic comparison, and imaginative reconstruction. The act of decoding became an intellectual dialogue with the Mycenaean scribes, revealing the complexity of their world while emphasizing how much remained unknowable. Ventris approached the tablets not merely as objects but as living traces of thought, an intersection of past consciousness and modern analysis that allowed history to speak across a gulf of 3,000 years. The revelations redefined knowledge of the Aegean Bronze Age, demonstrating an advanced bureaucracy, literacy, and record-keeping that challenged assumptions about the capabilities of early civilizations. Linear B showed that the Mycenaeans managed resources, coordinated religious and political rituals, and recorded information with precision far earlier than previously recognized. These insights reshaped understanding of the connections between palace administration, trade networks, and social hierarchy. Yet the deeper implications remained elusive. For all the decoded content, the subtleties of cultural context, intent, and daily life were only partially recoverable, leaving scholars to speculate on dimensions of civilization that no tablet could fully capture. Even after the final meanings were mapped, Linear B retained its aura of mystery, hinting at customs, knowledge, and practices that the surviving records could never fully illuminate, leaving a sense of incompleteness that transcended linguistic achievement. The tablets themselves, once inscrutable, now whispered of the minds that had crafted them, but the voices were fragmented and selective. Ventris had opened a door into the Bronze Age Aegean, yet the shadows beyond remained dense and impenetrable. Each newly interpreted phrase illuminated some truths while simultaneously reminding scholars of the vast unknown that persisted in the absence of written testimony. Though the script had been cracked, the minds behind it remained elusive, their thoughts echoing faintly across millennia, leaving only fragments of a civilization's hidden brilliance. Alexander Karlov, Siberian Burial Sites. Alexander Karlov first noticed the unusual alignment of ancient burial mounds in archival maps, their precise spacing and orientation hinting at an intelligence that seemed impossible for Siberia's early cultures. These mounds, scattered across permafrost plains and taiga, bore subtle geometric patterns that suggested deliberate planning, yet the surrounding region offered few clues about the people who had constructed them. Karlov, intrigued by the challenge, realized that beneath these frozen earthworks lay a system of knowledge, ritual, and preservation unlike anything recorded in existing historical accounts. The discovery promised a glimpse into a civilization whose sophistication had been largely erased by time and isolation. Before Karlov's expeditions, little was known about these societies, their practices largely inferred from sporadic finds, leaving centuries of ritual and technological knowledge concealed beneath layers of earth. Scholars had documented scattered artifacts, tools, ornaments, and skeletal remains, but the broader patterns remained invisible. Siberia's extreme environment, with its shifting permafrost and remoteness, had protected these sites from casual disturbance, preserving details that might have otherwise vanished. The combination of isolation and preservation presented both opportunity and challenge. Karlov could uncover unprecedented insights, but the complexity and fragility of the mounds demanded extreme care and painstaking methodology. Karlov's work required meticulous planning, from coordinating teams in remote regions to overcoming the constant challenges of isolation, harsh weather, and terrain that resisted every step of progress. Expeditions were organized in stages, with sleds, pack animals, and temporary field stations supporting labor-intensive excavation. Every dig was timed to the brief Siberian summer, when thawed soil allowed for careful removal of layers without damaging fragile artifacts. Even under the best conditions, frost and waterlogged soil threatened both tools and finds, and Karlov had to adapt his techniques constantly, blending ingenuity with caution to ensure that the mounds revealed their secrets without being destroyed in the process. Early digs uncovered tombs built with extraordinary precision, containing skeletal remains positioned with care, alongside artifacts that suggested sophisticated cultural practices far earlier than expected. Some burials included multiple individuals arranged according to apparent social hierarchies, while others featured layers of organic and mineral material designed to preserve the body. Karlov observed that the placement of objects, tools, ornaments, and ritual items was consistent across sites, implying shared traditions and codified knowledge. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that these were not haphazard graves, but carefully constructed spaces intended to convey information or power, encoded in the arrangement of both bodies and belongings. Among the finds were engraved tools, intricate jewellery, and ceremonial objects that displayed levels of craftsmanship and design, suggesting knowledge that seemed to outpace the known technological capabilities of the era. Metalwork exhibited surprising refinement, while wooden items retained carvings of geometric patterns, indicating a high degree of artistry and precision. Some objects appeared to have symbolic meaning, possibly connected to cosmology, social status, or spiritual belief. Karlov noted that the sophistication of these artifacts raised questions about the transmission of knowledge across regions, suggesting that Siberian cultures were part of broader networks of skill and influence previously unrecognized in academic research. The burial techniques themselves reflected deliberate planning, layers of protection against decay, careful orientation of bodies, and tomb constructions that implied an understanding of preservation and ritual beyond what was previously imagined. Soil layers, wooden barriers, and organic coverings created microenvironments that slowed decomposition, allowing bones and objects to remain intact for millennia. Certain tombs were oriented according to celestial markers, hinting at astronomical observation and ritual timing. The combination of environmental engineering and ceremonial intent suggested a culture capable of anticipating the long-term effects of climate and time, embedding their knowledge into structures designed to endure beyond a single generation. From site to site, recurring arrangements became clear, symbols repeated, tombs aligned in consistent formations, hinting at beliefs or knowledge systems whose meaning remains partially hidden from modern comprehension. Geometric carvings, recurring motifs, and symbolic objects suggested codified systems of thought, perhaps intended to transmit cultural or spiritual knowledge to future generations. Some alignments corresponded to seasonal changes, while others were less easily explained, leaving an air of deliberate secrecy. Karloff began to understand that the sites were not merely graves but repositories of a civilization's knowledge, encoded in ways that could be read only with extreme care and contextual understanding. Scientific studies, including radiocarbon dating and forensic analysis, confirmed both the authenticity and unexpected sophistication of the sites, yet each discovery deepened the sense of mystery surrounding the culture. Dates established antiquity, while material analysis revealed craftsmanship and metallurgy that were advanced for the region and era. Even as technology helped clarify some questions, it also revealed contradictions and anomalies, hinting at practices and knowledge that could not be fully explained by contemporary understanding. The more Karloff and his team examined the remains, the more they realized that Siberia's ancient inhabitants had intentionally preserved a complex legacy, shrouded in both symbolism and technique. Some anomalies defied explanation. Artifacts whose design was unusual for the region, tools seemingly advanced for the period, and tomb arrangements that suggested intentional encoding of unknown knowledge. Certain items appeared to have no practical function, existing purely as objects of design or ritual significance. The meticulous orientation of graves, combined with repeated symbolic patterns, suggested the deliberate communication of information or belief across generations. Karloff often paused to consider the intentions of those who constructed the tombs, recognizing that these individuals may have possessed an understanding that transcended the technological and cultural assumptions of modern scholarship. Karloff's findings implied that Siberian societies were far more advanced and interconnected than previously recognized, leaving hints of traditions, craftsmanship, and social organization that vanished with time. Artifacts from separate sites shared stylistic elements, and burial methods suggested coordinated cultural practice across vast distances. Evidence pointed to trade, ritual standardization, and possibly shared knowledge of environmental management. These conclusions challenged prior assumptions that Siberia's early peoples were isolated or primitive, revealing a civilization with cognitive, technical, and social capacities that demanded rethinking of the region's prehistoric history. Even Karloff himself was struck by a sense of unease and wonder, feeling that these tombs contained knowledge intentionally preserved, as if the creators had sought to leave a message for those who could decipher it. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that not everything could be interpreted through conventional archaeology. Some patterns and symbols hinted at spiritual or cosmological principles lost to memory. Karloff's meticulous documentation preserved as much as possible, but he often returned to his notes in the quiet of the evening, pondering what the ancient builders had known and what might remain forever inaccessible. In the shadow of ancient earthworks, the burial sites retain a profound mystery, revealing fragments of belief and practice while keeping the full story of these ancient people hidden. Each mound, artifact, and skeletal arrangement offered insights, yet gaps persisted, leaving unanswered questions about intent, meaning, and cultural context. Karloff recognized that the Siberian sites were a kind of puzzle left by a civilization that had vanished almost entirely, preserving hints of intelligence and sophistication that modern researchers could glimpse but never fully reconstruct. The enigma of these tombs continues to draw archaeologists, historians, and scholars into their silent, frozen narrative. The Siberian tombs remain guardians of secrets frozen in time, their meaning suspended between discovery and eternal silence, daring the curious to unravel them. Jacques de Morgan, Persian Antiquities. A quiet hum of history seemed to linger in the air, as if the very arrangement of metal and clay whispered a knowledge meant to survive unseen. Jacques de Morgan, examining the artifacts of Persia, found himself confronting objects that challenged expectations of ancient skill. Bronze vessels bore intricate engravings. Carved stone panels carried patterns whose symmetry hinted at deliberate intent. Across centuries, Persian artisans had refined techniques that blended precision, symbolism, and durability, leaving traces of their ingenuity scattered like cryptic notes in time. De Morgan observed that objects recovered from Elamite and early Achaemenid sites shared stylistic consistencies despite geographic distance, suggesting a transmission of specialized skills. Ornamental motifs, metal alloys, and sculpted forms reflected a civilization that valued both aesthetic and functional perfection. Examination revealed meticulous alignments and repeating motifs, suggesting deliberate systems of thought embedded in the form and function of everyday and ceremonial objects. Reliefs carved into stone displayed mirrored geometries, while ceramic vessels repeated symbolic patterns across multiple sites. De Morgan began to recognize a language of design that transcended decoration, one that hinted at spiritual, social, or possibly practical knowledge encoded through craft. Some discoveries defied conventional categorization: small figurines, engraved vessels, and carved reliefs whose purpose could not be fully explained, yet reflected astonishing craftsmanship. A bronze statuette, barely the size of a hand, showed a precision of form that seemed improbable for its age. Carved stone tablets contained arrangements of motifs whose repetition suggested deliberate encoding rather than random ornamentation. Each find reinforced the sense that Persia had preserved techniques and insights intentionally beyond the reach of casual understanding. The materials themselves seemed extraordinary: metals alloyed to exact specifications, stones shaped with geometric accuracy, and ceramics fired to resist both wear and time. Analysis revealed copper and bronze compositions that exhibited uniformity and durability, unusual for the period. Stones were smoothed and carved with techniques suggesting specialized tools or advanced measurement systems. Ceramics retained intricate painted motifs that had survived centuries in harsh climates, their colors and patterns defying natural erosion. Decorative motifs and inscriptions implied meaning beyond aesthetic appeal, hinting at encoded information, ritual significance, or knowledge intended to endure for generations. Stylized animals, abstract symbols, and geometric forms recurred across different objects, sometimes in arrangements that suggested codified information. De Morgan speculated that some motifs had a ceremonial purpose, while others could contain social or cosmological instruction embedded within design. This subtle complexity, encoded visually and materially, imbued each object with a sense of purpose that extended far beyond ordinary craftsmanship, leaving scholars to wonder what information had been deliberately preserved for those capable of interpreting it. Even the arrangement of buildings and ceremonial spaces suggested advanced planning, with spatial relationships that revealed logic and design principles now forgotten. Foundations, platforms, and courtyards followed precise orientations, sometimes aligning with solar patterns or cardinal directions. Stone terraces and palace layouts reflected a level of geometric and engineering understanding that exceeded previous assumptions about early Persian societies. De Morgan recognized that every artifact, from the largest relief to the smallest tool, interacted with its surroundings in a system of design that conveyed intention across both space and time. Consistency across multiple sites indicated that artisans and architects were operating within shared conventions, transmitting expertise through design language rather than text. Objects recovered hundreds of miles apart displayed the same decorative vocabulary, material selection, and symbolic motifs, implying deliberate instruction or cultural standardization. De Morgan noted that these parallels suggested knowledge networks and teaching methods embedded within the craft itself, allowing skill and cultural meaning to persist even in the absence of written codices. Yet anomalies remained: objects with unexpected functionality, reliefs that seemed deliberately cryptic, and constructions that challenged contemporary understanding of Persian technology. Some implements combined multiple purposes, while certain reliefs resisted interpretation, their symbolic meaning obscured or lost. Architectural innovations such as water channels, storage designs, and ceremonial platforms demonstrated planning and technique that defied conventional expectations. These findings revealed the Persian world as more sophisticated and interconnected than previously imagined, with technological, ceremonial, and artistic practices that challenged the assumptions of both contemporaries and modern scholars. Trade routes, shared motifs, and standardized construction techniques suggested knowledge networks spanning large regions. Ritual objects reflected uniform practices that hinted at shared belief systems and social hierarchies. The more De Morgan uncovered, the more Persia appeared as a civilization consciously encoding intelligence across centuries. Even those who meticulously catalogued and studied these works sensed the presence of intentional mystery, as if the creators had embedded a legacy meant to endure yet remain partially hidden. De Morgan himself reflected on the paradox of preservation and concealment. The objects were both visible and secret, communicating sophistication while withholding full understanding. It was as though the artisans had anticipated future discovery, designing artifacts to challenge the perception and understanding of those who might one day encounter them. Amid thorough documentation and analysis, many aspects of these antiquities remained unresolved, preserving an aura of mystery that resisted scholarly explanation. Objects suggested knowledge of metallurgy, geometry, and ritual that exceeded what surviving texts or oral traditions could explain. Every excavation deepened both insight and uncertainty, hinting at principles intentionally encoded into Persian material culture that could never be fully unravelled. The artifacts retained their enigmatic power, standing as silent witnesses to a civilization that had mastered the art of preserving both knowledge and secrecy. Some creations seemed to carry a silent challenge, daring every observer to uncover the lost intelligence encoded within their precise and enigmatic forms. Selin Dead Sea Scroll excavations. A faint shimmer of light traced along the cave walls, revealing jagged crevices where centuries of dust and shadow had settled, and within that silence Selin sensed the weight of hidden knowledge waiting to be uncovered. As he stepped carefully, the air seemed to thicken with the presence of human history, compressed and preserved within the rock. Every small crevice hinted at stories long forgotten, while the faint smell of earth and age mingled with a sense of anticipation. The caves themselves felt purposeful, almost as if they had been chosen to guard the fragile truths concealed inside fragile vessels. The Judean desert had long been a landscape of extremes, its harsh climate and isolation preserving fragments of civilizations and beliefs that teetered on the edge of myth and history. Selin understood that such isolation had a dual effect. It both protected fragile objects and shrouded them in obscurity, hiding knowledge from outsiders for centuries. Nomadic paths, scattered ruins, and the faintest traces of pottery suggested human activity, yet the broader patterns of habitation were difficult to discern. This desolate environment seemed to amplify the stakes of every discovery, as if the desert itself had conspired to ensure only the observant could uncover what it held. Signs of human presence emerged subtly: fragments of pottery, overturned stones, and faint traces of paths that hinted at the existence of communities long vanished. Selin's trained eye caught slight irregularities in the stone surfaces, indentations, grooves, and worn areas suggesting repeated use. Jars buried in concealed niches hinted at purposeful concealment, as if the inhabitants had anticipated that future generations might find, yet fail to fully understand, their most sacred objects. Every small clue reinforced the notion that this was a place of secrecy and deliberate preservation, where daily life and ritual converged to leave only faint but meaningful traces behind. When the scrolls themselves first appeared, wrapped in protective jars and fragile with age, Selin recognized that these were not merely documents, but vessels of memory, carefully preserved against time and decay. The leather of each scroll had darkened to near black, and the ink, though faded, retained clarity in places where shadows protected it from sunlight. Handling the scrolls required delicate precision, with each movement measured to avoid the slightest tear. Selin marvelled at the foresight of those who had stored them so carefully. These texts had survived centuries in total obscurity, awaiting discovery in a place where both knowledge and mystery were equally preserved. The text within defied easy understanding, written in scripts that blended known languages with forms that suggested ritual, secrecy, or symbolic encoding beyond contemporary comprehension. Hebrew and Aramaic appeared alongside stylistic flourishes and abbreviations, creating layers of meaning that required patient study. Some passages referred to laws or rules, while others hinted at esoteric practices, leaving Selin uncertain whether he was seeing a mundane account or an intentionally hidden doctrine. Each line, each carefully scribed character, seemed chosen for both clarity and concealment, creating an ongoing tension between revelation and secrecy that fascinated and frustrated him in equal measure. With each uncovered fragment, the work required methodical patience. Every piece had to be recorded, measured, and positioned to maintain the delicate relationship between artifact, context, and meaning. Selin employed the latest archaeological techniques, including careful stratigraphic observation and meticulous cataloguing, ensuring that no detail went unrecorded. Even a slight displacement of a jar or scroll could obscure connections to nearby objects or markings. His methodical approach allowed him to reconstruct aspects of Qumran life, the placement of scrolls, and the choices made by their original custodians. The precision of this work underscored the complexity of the hidden knowledge and the care required to interpret it responsibly. Some passages hinted at esoteric rituals and community rules, while others posed questions about beliefs and practices deliberately obscured, leaving Schliemann both fascinated and unsettled. Certain texts described moral codes or ceremonial instructions in ways that implied a deeper significance accessible only to initiates. References to purification, sacred observances, and hidden wisdom suggested that the scrolls were more than records. They were repositories of a philosophy designed to be partly impenetrable. Even when cross-referenced with other known texts, gaps remained, hinting at intentional omission and encoded meaning that resisted conventional interpretation. The materials themselves offered clues: the fine leather of the scrolls, inks that resisted fading, and jars sealed with care suggested knowledge of preservation techniques that hinted at foresight and intentionality. The thickness of parchment, the mixing of ink with mineral additives, and the careful sealing of jars all indicated a sophisticated understanding of materials and environment. These choices preserved not just the text but also the aura of secrecy surrounding it. Schliemann recognized that the physicality of the scrolls, their texture, smell, and resilience, was as deliberate as the words inscribed, reflecting a culture that understood both the fragility and the endurance of knowledge. Connections became apparent when scrolls were compared across different caves and sites, showing recurring references and structures that implied deliberate transmission of information across generations. Passages paralleled one another, with variations suggesting adaptation or emphasis rather than error. Deeper patterns emerged in the placement of jars, the type of scripts used, and the topics covered, indicating shared knowledge systems within a community. Schliemann discerned a careful orchestration of both content and preservation, hinting at a deliberate strategy to maintain secrets across space and time, leaving fragments for the observant, yet keeping the full meaning just out of reach. The implications of these finds reached far beyond archaeology, challenging understandings of early Jewish sects, historical texts, and how knowledge was guarded, transmitted, or concealed. Schliemann's discoveries prompted questions about authority, secrecy, and interpretation. Who had the right to access these texts, and what truths were intentionally withheld? Scholars debated the significance of these hidden writings, noting that the scrolls illuminated practices and beliefs often absent from canonical texts. The scrolls blurred the line between history and mystery, suggesting that knowledge can be preserved with precision, yet remain fundamentally elusive to all but those who comprehend its original context. Schliemann often reflected on the balance between revelation and concealment, realizing that the scrolls spoke in riddles, providing glimpses of wisdom while leaving the greater truth shrouded in ambiguity. Even as he translated fragments and compared them with other sources, he recognized the gaps intentionally left by their authors. Each discovery deepened both insight and uncertainty, reinforcing the idea that some knowledge had been deliberately coded into the physical and textual arrangement. The scrolls were simultaneously accessible and secret, offering a window into a past that could be approached but never fully entered. Within the bounds of careful study, many questions remained unanswered. Fragments resisted interpretation, passages seemed intentionally obscure, and the caves themselves preserved a silence that could not be decoded by modern methods. Even decades later, scholars would grapple with inconsistencies, missing sections, and references that defied conventional understanding. The material and textual evidence combined to create a landscape of uncertainty, suggesting both remarkable sophistication and deliberate obfuscation. In Qumran, the echoes of the past remained both vivid and unknowable, leaving Schliemann's legacy intertwined with the enduring enigma of the scrolls he uncovered. The scrolls seemed to pulse with secrets meant for no eye but their original keepers, leaving each discovery as tantalizing as it was incomplete. Paul-Emile Botta, Assyrian Palaces. The weight of stone and scale pressed upon every sense as Botta stepped into halls whose ceilings seemed to stretch beyond comprehension, the air vibrating with echoes of ceremonies long vanished. Every surface was covered with carvings and inscriptions, yet the sheer size of the rooms made the details almost overwhelming, compelling him to move slowly, absorbing each relief and every patterned floor tile. The Assyrian kings had conceived these structures not merely as residences, but as instruments of authority, projecting power through walls, gates, and corridors that defied ordinary human expectation. Botta realized that these palaces communicated both wealth and domination. Every carved lion, every winged deity, and every monumental doorway sent a message to subjects and enemies alike. The layout combined ceremonial, administrative, and defensive elements, revealing a civilization that understood the psychological as well as physical impact of architecture. Foundations and buttresses revealed a mastery of engineering, with massive blocks aligned so precisely that even centuries of seismic shifts could not disrupt their order. Botta noted the precision in the placement of stones, some weighing several tons, and the careful layering that allowed enormous walls to endure without collapse. Staircases, drainage channels, and corridors showed thoughtful planning, anticipating movement, weather, and even ritual procession. The construction techniques reflected both ingenuity and foresight, demonstrating that these palaces were conceived as enduring monuments. Reliefs carved along every wall depicted lions, winged figures, and battles whose symbolism suggested both divine sanction and coded messages intended for a select audience. Each figure, each gesture, seemed to communicate authority, morality, and cosmic order. Botta realized that these artworks were not mere decoration. They were sophisticated instruments of cultural expression, simultaneously telling history, asserting power, and encoding information for those who could read it in full. Chambers, hidden behind ornamental doors and recessed niches, hinted at functions now lost to time, leaving only speculation as to their ceremonial, administrative, or sacred purpose. Botta observed stairways that led nowhere, rooms without clear entrances, and corridors that seemed to funnel movement in precise patterns. Some spaces may have been intended for ritual or observation, others for storing treasure or important documents. These hidden areas conveyed a sense that the palaces were designed to communicate to both the initiated and the outsider, with some secrets deliberately sealed within the walls. Even with careful study, Botta confronted the challenge of interpreting spatial and artistic choices whose significance may have been clear only to those within the palace walls at the time. Certain orientations aligned with astronomical events, others reinforced the impact of natural light, while still more suggested ritualized movement. Botta documented each observation meticulously, aware that understanding the palaces required both patience and imagination. Every discovery deepened the sense of wonder and uncertainty, reinforcing the notion that the architects had encoded layers of meaning intended to survive, but resist complete comprehension. Sculpted motifs repeated across halls, trees, rosettes, and stylized animals spoke of cultural ideals and religious beliefs, intertwined with messages of authority and permanence. Botta traced the repetition of winged figures and divine guardians along corridors and throne rooms, noting subtle variations in style and posture. These details suggested intentional encoding of status, ritual, or myth. The motifs connected distant parts of the palace, unifying spaces under symbolic language and suggesting that art and architecture were inseparable tools for expressing power and cultural identity. Reliefs and architectural features revealed a deliberate consistency, implying a shared design language among architects and artisans that conveyed meaning across distances and generations. Certain sculptors' techniques appeared consistent in multiple palaces, suggesting formal training or a master-apprentice system. Stone reliefs were mirrored in separate wings, while floor and wall proportions followed ratios that hinted at measurement systems beyond casual observation. These patterns reinforced the impression of a culture capable of extraordinary planning, embedding both knowledge and symbolism within monumental construction. The precision of drainage systems, gateways, and staircases suggested technical sophistication that surpassed assumptions about what early civilizations could achieve in both planning and execution. Water channels were angled to prevent flooding while maintaining aesthetic symmetry. Gates were reinforced yet aligned with symbolic axes. Stairs led visitors along controlled sightlines. Botta understood that the architects were engineers as much as artists, blending practical and symbolic considerations seamlessly. The palaces embodied mastery of environment and material, leaving visitors to wonder how much knowledge had been applied deliberately to both impress and confound. Every grand throne room, courtyard, and ceremonial corridor offered insights into Assyrian hierarchy, ritual, and governance. Yet some spaces remained enigmatic. their original function tantalizingly elusive. Botta observed inscriptions alongside symbolic reliefs that documented victories, religious rites, and royal lineage, while other rooms offered no such explanation. The contrast between clarity and mystery created a layered narrative, allowing the palaces to speak to insiders and outsiders differently. The palaces thus functioned as both public spectacle and private archive. Botta often paused in silent corridors, struck by the tension between what was revealed and what remained obscured, aware that each wall could contain knowledge intentionally hidden from view. The interplay of shadow and relief, space and scale suggested deliberate choices designed to communicate selectively. Botta's work revealed extraordinary skill and insight, but it also highlighted limits. The palaces were monuments of communication, partially accessible, yet always guarding deeper truths beyond immediate perception. Encased in intricate design, many architectural and artistic choices resisted full explanation, leaving the palaces as repositories of both human ingenuity and deliberate mystery. Reliefs, chambers, and structural innovations continue to confound scholars, suggesting that some intentions were encoded for understanding only by those with specialized knowledge or authority. Botta recognized that his discoveries were both revealing and concealing, a paradox that defined the legacy of Assyrian architecture. The palaces of Assyria still seem to whisper of power, devotion, and knowledge, leaving their full purpose hidden behind walls that have endured millennia. R.A. Stewart Macalister Irish megalithic tombs. Fog clung to the ancient stones, softening edges and muting the landscape as Macalister traced the outline of tombs whose purpose had baffled generations. Each massive slab rose from the earth, with deliberate weight and placement, hinting at careful planning and laborious effort. Macalister approached methodically, noting the arrangement of slabs and passageways while contemplating the intentions of their long-departed builders. These megalithic structures scattered across islands, fields and hills spoke of a society that devoted immense labour to both memory and ritual, leaving clues embedded in stone. Burial practices suggested an enduring reverence for the dead, while the tomb's scale implied coordination among communities capable of organising extraordinary work. Pottery shards, bones, and traces of organic matter were found in precise placements, hinting at ceremonies now largely unknown. Each tomb became a puzzle, a silent testament to cultural knowledge carefully encoded in architecture, waiting to be deciphered by those willing to observe with patience. Each massive slab bore witness to ingenuity and strength, carefully erected and balanced, hinting at techniques that remain impressive even by modern standards. Lever systems, counterweights, and coordinated teams would have been required to maneuver stones weighing several tons. Macalister noted these alignments and hypothesized the involvement of sophisticated measurement techniques, revealing a society that merged practical skill with cosmological awareness. The effort and foresight required to build these tombs suggested that their creators were not only builders, but also planners and astronomers, weaving purpose into stone. Some stones displayed carvings, spirals, chevrons, and abstract motifs that suggested symbolic language, the meaning of which has eluded historians and archaeologists alike. These motifs appeared with variation across multiple tombs, implying intentional communication or codification of beliefs. Spirals often traced interior passageways or adorned central chambers, perhaps representing cycles of life, death, or celestial movement. Macalister documented these carefully, noting wear patterns and placement that might indicate ritual use. The symbols, though enigmatic, hinted at an intricate worldview encoded in stone for generations to interpret. Certain tombs aligned with the rising sun at solstices or lunar events, revealing a sophisticated awareness of celestial cycles and their integration into ritual practice. Chambers and passageways often intersected with solar paths, so that morning light would illuminate interior carvings on particular days of the year. Macalister recorded these observations, considering both astronomical knowledge and the cultural significance of seasonal events. Such alignment suggested that the builders linked cosmic phenomena to ritual observance and societal order. The careful integration of landscape architecture and celestial observation reflected a worldview in which stone, sky, and human activity converged to create a sacred geometry whose meaning is only partially understood. Passageways and chambers contained remnants of human activity, including carefully placed bones, pottery fragments, and offerings whose arrangement hinted at deliberate, if now mysterious, ceremonial purpose. Others contained objects whose functional symbolism remained speculative, carved figurines, votive stones, and organic remnants placed with care. Macalister's excavation revealed patterns in deposition, indicating intentionality beyond mere interment. Each object, each placement, served as a fragment of a larger system of meaning, a subtle communication between the living and the dead that has persisted in silence for millennia. Even with a detailed study, Macalister encountered interpretive challenges, recognizing that some architectural choices and carvings were intended to remain enigmatic to outsiders. The arrangement of chambers, passages, and entryways often obscured the full spatial plan, requiring careful measurement and reconstruction. Certain carvings were intentionally subtle or partially hidden, as if the builders expected only the initiated to fully grasp their significance. Macalister's notes and sketches sought to preserve context, yet many questions persisted. Why some tombs deviated from standard patterns, which rituals accompanied burial, and what messages were intentionally encoded for future generations? Consistent chamber dimensions, orientation, and carved motifs appeared repeatedly across sites, hinting at cultural continuity and a shared symbolic language among disparate communities. Patterns in stone placement, passage length, and artwork implied shared knowledge across regions and generations. Macalister observed that these consistencies likely reflected both practical construction methods and symbolic significance. The repetition of certain forms and orientations hinted at common beliefs, ritual practice, or social organization. Collectively, these repeated features conveyed an overarching system of thought, linking tombs across geography and time in ways still partially obscured from modern understanding. The tomb's placement in the landscape, overlooking valleys adjacent to watercourses or on hilltops, demonstrated a purposeful relationship with the natural environment, as if the land itself was part of the design. Macalister noted that surrounding topography guided both visibility and approach, suggesting ritualized pathways to reach interior chambers. The tombs were not isolated monuments. They engaged actively with geography, integrating the natural world into human practice. Each site became a dialogue between landscape and architecture, revealing a worldview in which human intervention complemented, rather than dominated, the environment, leaving patterns that still evoke wonder. Through careful observation, Macalister inferred aspects of social hierarchy, ritual practice, and reverence for ancestors, though much remained concealed within the stones. Chamber size, burial frequency, and placement of offerings suggested roles and statuses within communities. The scale and labour investment implied organised cooperation and social structure, yet gaps in evidence left uncertainty about political or religious authority. Macalister pieced together a tentative picture, aware that even the most meticulous reconstruction could not fully reveal the worldview of Neolithic societies. Mystery remained inherent in the interplay between intention, labour, and symbolism. He often paused in silent chambers, sensing the tension between revelation and concealment, aware that the builders encoded messages that survived in the cold, enduring stone. Macalister reflected on the ways in which architecture manipulated experience, guiding movement, attention, and contemplation. These tombs were not simply repositories of the dead. They were deliberate instruments of memory, perception, and perhaps spiritual instruction. The silence of stone amplified human intention, leaving Macalister to decipher traces of thought, belief, and ritual that had endured far longer than any written record. From floor to ceiling, the tombs reveal carvings, alignments, and chamber placements that resist full explanation, leaving them as enduring enigmas whose purpose continues to elude comprehension. Macalister's work preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost, yet the tombs themselves remained intentionally elusive. Their endurance in stone, landscape, and cultural memory underscored the creator's mastery in combining permanence with mystery, leaving modern observers both informed and confounded. The stones of Ireland's ancient tombs seem to murmur across centuries, offering guidance only to those who can decipher their silent, enduring language. William Flinders, Petrie, Abydos, and early dynastic Egypt. The desert stretched endlessly, its heat rising in wavering waves above the sand, as Petrie approached Abydos with the anticipation of uncovering centuries of concealed history. Sunlight glinted off scattered limestone fragments, hinting at tombs long buried beneath drifting dunes. The silence was profound, broken only by the shifting wind over sand and stone, emphasizing the isolation of these ancient necropolises. In the midst of such vastness, Petrie methodically began his survey, measuring, sketching and recording, with a precision that sought to capture not only the physical layout, but the hidden logic of early dynastic burial practices. This sacred city, a hub of early dynastic power and ritual, held tombs that bore silent witness to the emergence of Egypt's first kings and their complex ceremonial practices. Royal names etched in the walls hinted at dynastic continuity and reverence for ancestry, while the surrounding necropolis reflected social stratification encoded in spatial arrangement. Every observation contributed to a broader understanding of the society that had orchestrated such deliberate memorialization, blending practical engineering with ritual observance in ways that continue to puzzle modern scholars. Petrie's meticulous methods transformed excavation into a precise science, recording measurements, stratigraphy, and artifact placement with an attention that revealed more than casual observation ever could. He insisted on documenting every layer of soil, noting colour changes and granular composition, recognizing that subtle shifts held clues to construction sequences. Pottery shards and stone fragments were catalogued with unparalleled rigour, their positions meticulously noted, allowing later reconstructions to understand tomb chronology and usage. The mastabas and subterranean chambers varied in size and layout, yet each displayed intentional orientation and proportion, hinting at architectural principles that guided early dynastic builders. Some chambers were elongated, others compact, yet the alignment with cardinal points remained consistent, suggesting knowledge of geometry and astronomy. Petrie recorded entrance positions, corridor angles, and chamber dimensions, noting deviations that might indicate symbolic decisions rather than error. Hieroglyphs and symbolic carvings lined tomb walls, naming rulers, invoking deities, and encoding meaning in ways that spoke to both permanence and secrecy. Petrie examined early dynastic symbols that hinted at religious ideology, political power, and ancestral veneration, noting subtle stylistic variations across tombs. Certain inscriptions were deliberately placed within recesses or chambers that received limited light, suggesting selective visibility. The pictorial language appeared to be a codified system, one designed to endure yet restrict understanding to initiates, or those attuned to the symbolic framework of the period. Burial goods, from finely crafted pottery to delicate amulets, offered glimpses into ritual significance, craftsmanship, and the worldview of those interred, each object carefully positioned to convey purpose. Petrie meticulously documented these items, noting placement relative to bodies, chamber walls, and other offerings. Materials ranged from locally quarried stone to imported items, hinting at long-distance trade or ceremonial exchange. The precision in placement suggested that objects were not merely decorative or functional, but carried encoded meaning, forming a silent narrative of belief, authority, and afterlife expectations that continues to challenge modern interpretation. The recurrence of dimensions and standardized construction elements across tombs indicated an organized system of knowledge, integrating aesthetic, ritual, and structural concerns into a unified design. Petrie noted consistent ratios in chamber height and width, recurring entrance designs, and proportional spacing that implied adherence to precise measurement standards. This regularity suggested training, cultural transmission, and a codified architectural language that permitted variations while maintaining core principles. The convergence of measurement, symbolism, and repetition created a tangible link across tombs, connecting early dynastic communities through shared knowledge encoded in stone. Certain chambers aligned with solar phenomena or cardinal directions, indicating deliberate incorporation of celestial observation into tomb planning, subtly guiding the interaction between light and space. Petrie observed how sunlight penetrated specific chambers during solstices, illuminating inscriptions and ritual objects in ways that were both ceremonial and symbolic. The orientation of tombs and corridors suggested that architects understood the interplay between geometry, astronomy, and human experience, embedding temporal and cosmological awareness into the very design. Through tomb layouts and artifact distribution, Petrie inferred aspects of social hierarchy, the roles of priests and rulers, and practices that bound the living to the dead in cycles of belief. Larger tombs with elaborate goods indicated elite status, while more modest burials suggested commoners or retainers. Certain placements implied ritualized procession or ceremonial access, and Petrie speculated on the interplay of secular and sacred authority. These tombs offered insight into governance, religion, and social organization, while simultaneously concealing intentional mysteries embedded within their arrangement. From the remains of destroyed inscriptions and partial artifacts, scholars faced interpretive challenges, leaving gaps in understanding while reinforcing the sense that some knowledge had been intentionally obscured. Petrie encountered chambers damaged by time, erosion, or previous looting, complicating attempts at complete reconstruction. These partial records hinted at a broader narrative that could only be partially apprehended, reminding observers that early dynastic Egyptians may have deliberately designed tombs to reveal selective truths while leaving other knowledge hidden for the initiated or future generations. Even after painstaking excavation, Petrie felt the tension between revelation and secrecy, aware that each measured stone and recorded hieroglyph hinted at truths partially withheld from posterity. The precision of architecture and artifacts suggested conscious planning to convey power, spirituality, and social order while preserving aspects of mystery. Petrie reflected on how these choices created a dialogue across time, where modern observers could glimpse ingenuity, belief, and ritual, yet never fully access the mind of the tomb builders. Though meticulously recorded, Abydos remained enigmatic, its tombs and inscriptions preserving layers of meaning accessible only to those willing to probe their deliberate design and precision. Petrie's recordings allowed later scholars to reconstruct sequences of rulers, social practices, and material culture, yet the broader symbolic intentions of the builders eluded complete understanding. The site's enduring allure lies in this tension, a record of early dynastic ingenuity intertwined with mysteries that continue to challenge interpretation and imagination alike. Under the unrelenting sun, the tombs of Abydos seem to whisper truths long sealed by time, awaiting those capable of reading their silent geometry.